Chapter 22. Hearing his father's words of encouragement, Lu Feng fell silent. He knew everything. The first to know about his talent was not himself, but his parents. Therefore, after knowing that he had entered the Federal University, Lu Tao's first thought was not to encourage him, but to hope that he would not be sad after the setback. Hearing his father still talking, Lu Feng smiled again. With a hint of slyness, he suddenly said, "But Dad, I'm already a beginner psychic." In an instant, Lu Tao's endless words came to an abrupt end. He looked at Lu Feng with a hint of disbelief. He was the one who knew his own child the best. Everything that had happened was still vivid in his mind. He knew that Lu Feng would never be able to become a beginner psychic in his life. It was also because of this that they came to the Cymbidium and he and his wife entered the BUCC company. But now that he heard Lu Feng say that he had become a beginner psychic, he was shocked. This made him somewhat unable to react. Is this true? Even though he knew that his child would never lie, let alone on such a matter, he knew that his child would never lie. But at this moment, Lu Tao could not help but ask. After all, Lu Feng was determined to never become a beginner psychic. Even if he was a warrior, he would at most stop at the intermediate level. One had to know that the one who said this was that person. How could his words be wrong? Lu Feng did not say anything. He only nodded firmly. "Dad, I really am a beginner psychic. And because of my identity as a beginner psychic, I was directly admitted by the Federal University." Silence. Absolute silence. In the next moment, Lu Tao looked at Lu Feng. He just looked at Lu Feng quietly. In a trance, through the virtual figure, Lu Feng seemed to see two sparkling lights. At this moment, Lu Feng was stunned. In his heart, his father was always a gentle and refined man. As for him, he always had a smile on his face. No matter who it was, he always had a smile on his face. What had Lu Feng ever seen his father cry? No, never. However, at this moment, when her father heard that she had become a beginner psychic, he actually cried. "Dad." Lu Feng didn't know what to say. He could only speak softly to awaken the abnormally silent Lu Tao. At this time, Lu Tao finally reacted. He looked at Lu Feng and revealed a different attitude. Good. All right. Good, this is too good." At this moment, Lu Tao had completely thrown away his scholarly appearance. Slightly crazy, Lu Feng actually saw a completely different appearance from Lu Tao's agitated figure. Vaguely, he felt that his father's usual appearance was not his true appearance at all. "Little Feng, father won't say anything else. You did a great job. Very well. How can I, Lu Tao's son, be a good-for-nothing? How can a son with such a bloodline be a good-for-nothing? The research this time is really too important. After your mother and I are done, we will go home immediately. At that time, father will give you a good celebration and tell you some things while we are at it. Little Feng, wait for father and mother to come back." The call ended quickly. Lu Feng didn't ask much because he saw that his father's colleague had come to urge his father. Before ending the call, Lu Feng expressed that he wanted some money to buy medicine for cultivation. Lu Tao didn't say anything. He directly agreed and transferred the money to Lu Feng in a while. He turned off the communication device. Lu Feng lay on the water sofa. However, he wasn't enjoying anything, because at this moment, Lu Feng was thinking. During the conversation with his father, Lu Feng thought of some questions. For example, that bloodline, and tell you some things while we are at it. He thought of those so-called cousins from before. Lu Feng vaguely seemed to understand something. At this moment, he sighed deeply. At this moment, the Sky Network on his wrist suddenly lit up. Lu Feng knew that the money his father gave him should have arrived. This is opening the Sky Network and looking at the numbers on his account balance. Lu Feng forgot everything. At this moment, his mind was blank. All he could see was those dazzling numbers. 10 million. Father actually transferred 10 million to me. Lu Feng looked at the numbers on the passbook in a daze. His eyes were wide open, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Although he was from a wealthy family, and his family property was calculated in hundreds of millions. However, he had never seen his parents give him more than 1 million like this time. In Lu Feng's memory, his father had never given him more than 800,000 for living expenses. The most he had given him was when he was in high school, just now. Including the rewards, it was 800,000. However, this time, his father didn't say anything and directly gave him 10 million. This made Lu Feng unable to accept it. However, Lu Feng reacted quickly. At this moment, his eyes were filled with ecstasy. It was a kind of ecstasy that couldn't be concealed. The moment he reacted, he thought of too many things. What he thought of the most was still cultivation. 10 million. I can totally enter and buy those specialized body refining tools. I can create some artificial dangerous spaces and rapidly increase my warrior level. Maybe before school starts, I can really cultivate the first stage of the Great Devil True Body, the Copper Body Great Devil, to the Great Devil Realm. At that time, my strength will undergo an earth-shattering change. Thinking of this, Lu Feng could no longer remain calm. Without hesitation, Lu Feng left the house. Because he couldn't wait to break through, walking out of the villa area, Lu Feng got on a public hover car and headed directly to the center of the city. Although this city was only a second-class city, in today's society, second-class cities were undoubtedly very terrifying. In the current galaxy age, there was no concept of countries. In the entire human society, there was only one federation. In a Cymbidium, there was only one government center. The city where the government center was located was the only super city in the entire Cymbidium. Below it, there were 17 first-class cities and hundreds of second-class cities. The entire Cymbidium's human population lived in these hundreds of cities. The Cymbidium's population was over 1 billion. On average, the population of a city was over 1 million. For example, the city that Lu Feng was in was one of the larger second-class cities. Therefore, the population was much higher than this average number. According to official statistics, the population of this city had already exceeded 3 million. A city with a population of 3 million was definitely an incomparably bustling large city. In the center of the city, almost everything could be found. As long as one needed it and had the money, one could definitely buy it and get it. Lu Fenglai came here to buy equipment that could create enough pressure. Lu Feng got off the hover car near the center of the city. He raised his head and looked at the gorgeous hover cars flying back and forth in the sky. A look of envy flashed across Lu Feng's eyes. If this was before his transformation, he might have spent some money to buy a gorgeous hover car and have a good time. However, things are different now, because compared to the hover car, Lu Feng wanted to break through more. After opening the Sky Network on his wrist, Lu Feng found his goal. Lu Feng didn't live in the city center. The place where he went to school was also in the suburbs. Therefore, Lu Feng wasn't very familiar with the city. If he wanted to go to the place he needed, he still had to use the Sky Network. Looking at the people and cars coming and going in the sky and on the ground, Lu Feng waited quietly. Just by looking at him, no one would believe that he was a student who had just graduated from high school. After all, such a calm student was really rare. After waiting for a long time, the public hover car to his destination finally arrived. He squeezed into the crowd and then began a short journey. In less than 10 minutes, the public hover car finally stopped. Lu Feng knew that he had arrived at his destination. After getting off the hover car, Lu Feng took a deep breath and looked at the huge building that was over 100 stories high. In front of him, there were a few huge signs hanging on the terrifying building. It was a circular icon. In the center of the icon, there was a huge bee that was constantly changing colors. This symbol was over 100 square meters in size. This was Lu Fenglai's goal in the city, BUCC building, as one of the top few intergalactic consortiums in the Federation. BUCC has its own branch on almost every planet, and every branch must be located in one of the most dazzling buildings on that planet. This was because they were never short of money. BUCC was a comprehensive company. They dealt with a wide variety of products, almost involving a person from birth to death. Everything that could be used in this business was very useful. However, as one of the top consortiums, BUCC also had its own main business target. And its main source of income was everything related to warriors. It could be said that when BUCC was first established, it was to serve warriors. They were most famous for their warrior equipment. From beginner warriors to advanced warriors, they even sold equipment that warriors needed. According to legend, BUCC even had many stable customers who were at the level of divine warriors. Divine warriors, in the eyes of ordinary people, could be called godlike existences. Their power was terrifying. As long as they released their own power, they could easily destroy a piece of heaven and earth and travel through the stars. Even if such an existence were to encounter a main battle fleet of the Federation with a universe-level battleship, they would still be able to easily defeat or even crush them. Only by using the Federation's ultimate strategic weapon of destruction, the Interstellar Fortress, there was nothing else that could deal with a divine warrior. Chapter 23. In the legends, the pinnacle of Shunwu was beyond the limits of human imagination. Their physical strength allowed them to traverse the universe. With a raise of their hands, they could easily crush a giant comet or even a planet inhabited by living beings. Even the interstellar fortresses were useless against such existences. Once they used their full combat power, even the combined power of human technology would not be able to fight against a pinnacle Shinwu. Shinwu is also known as Einherjar. In the Federation, it was the ultimate interstellar weapon, the most advanced interstellar fortress used to deter other races. Its original intention was to fight against a pinnacle Shunwu. Tianhua was the culmination of the most advanced human technology in the past few hundred years. Its predecessor was a relatively small star. It was able to transform a star into an interstellar fortress. There is no need to explain how terrifying Tianhua was. BUCC had a certain relationship with Shenwu and even became their trading partner. This undoubtedly showed the strength and foundation of this company. Therefore, when Lu Feng needed equipment for warrior training, the first company he thought of was BUCC. Of course, this had an inseparable relationship with his parents. From his bag, Lu Feng took out the Buck VIP card and walked directly to the 90th floor of the building. The Buck VIP card in his hand was not an ordinary VIP card. It was a VIP card given to him by his parents. With this card, he could enjoy the lowest discount in all BUCC purchases. As for how much it was, Lu Feng did not know, because this was the first time he used it. Sitting on the stairway, Lu Feng arrived at the 90th floor in just a few blinks of an eye. This was the place where warrior equipment was sold. The moment he walked out of the stairway, Lu Feng was slightly stunned, but he quickly recovered. Looking at the dazzling array of warrior-related items in front of him, Lu Feng could not help but sigh at Buck's comprehensive collection. Here, there were warrior equipment for sale. All kinds of body parts were sold. Of course, the level was not very high. After all, the 90th floor was mainly for beginner and intermediate warriors. For such low-level warriors, even if they were given Shinwu equipment, they would not be able to use it. In addition to equipment, there were also various kinds of training equipment. Lu Feng had been crazily training his body these past few years, so he had a good understanding of everything related to warriors. He was confident that he had seen most of the cultivation apparatuses. However, after seeing the things on the 90th floor, Lu Feng was still a little dazed. This was because most of them were completely new instruments that he had never seen before. Fortunately, there were introductions at the bottom of these instruments, so Lu Feng didn't have to guess by himself in a daze. They continued to walk around, even though they were here to buy cultivation equipment. However, Lu Feng didn't buy it and leave. He wanted to take a good look at what was being sold on this floor. Soon, Lu Feng reached the end of the floor. Usually, this kind of place was where the most valuable items on the floor were placed. It was the same here. This was because what appeared in front of Lu Feng was not some powerful equipment, nor was it some heaven-defying auxiliary instrument. What existed here were only some crystal-clear liquids and capsules. They were quietly immersed in all kinds of luxurious containers, lying peacefully in the special counters. They are all gene-type strengthening elixirs. Wow, there are so many of them. These were all elixirs that strengthened genes, and such things were very useful for warriors. They took the same elixirs as psychics. Lu Feng had seen these before, and he had taken them many times. However, This was the first time he had seen such a large number of elixirs with so many different types. Compared to this place, the elixir shops around their villa were simply not up to standard. Lu Feng walked in and looked at the introductions of these elixirs, his heart beating nonstop. These elixirs had heaven-defying effects for beginner and intermediate warriors. Take the Azure Elixir in front of Lu Feng, for example. Its name was T-Rex Elixir. As the name implied, after taking it, the warrior would have the strength of a T-Rex. However, such a saying was also a little exaggerated. T-Rex was a native creature found in a remote galaxy by the Federation. Their physical bodies were extremely strong. An adult T-Rex could almost be compared to a peak existence among high-ranking warriors. Their physical strength was above 900 stars. Because of their species, they could almost explode with 5 times their own terrifying combat strength. In other words, an adult T-Rex's powerful attack could reach 4,500 to 5,000 stars. What kind of concept was this? 1,000 stars was already the standard for warriors. In other words, if one wanted to defeat a T-Rex with only the strength of their physical body, then one would need to be at least a warrior to do so. Fortunately, humans still had cultivation techniques. Generally, to become a high-ranking warrior, one had to have at least comprehended a beginner or intermediate cultivation technique. Some incomparably talented warriors could even comprehend advanced cultivation techniques. It was the same for warriors. Therefore, not only were there talented warriors, but even talented high-ranking warriors could also defeat a T-Rex. Even so, this was enough to prove the strength of a T-Rex. The Azure medicine in front of him was named after a T-Rex. Although he didn't know its specific effects, Lu Feng could imagine its terrifying nature just from the name. Looking at the introduction below, even Lu Feng, who was used to seeing all kinds of medicines on the Sky Network, couldn't help but gasp, because this T-Rex medicine was really too terrifying. According to what was said, as long as one had a certain level of warrior talent after taking this T-Rex medicine, one could almost skip the breakthrough period and directly become a beginner warrior. Furthermore, if one broke through at the peak of a beginner warrior, then after the breakthrough, the warrior could basically directly step into the ranks of an intermediate or even a high-ranking beginner warrior. This was undoubtedly very terrifying. One had to know that this was a permanent strengthening and not a temporary increase. More importantly, the T-Rex medicine didn't have any side effects. This was what shocked Lu Feng the most. After all, Lu Feng had seen many potions on the Sky Network. Although many of them were far more effective than the tyrannical dragon potion, their side effects were abnormally terrifying. Therefore, medicines that didn't have any side effects were those kind of truly precious medicines. Looking at the level introduction below, Lu Feng nodded in understanding. This T-Rex medicine was actually a top-grade medicine among mid-grade medicines. Medicines were divided into beginner, mid-grade, high-grade, legendary, and mythical medicines. Every level of medicine was further divided into ordinary, precious, top-grade, and perfect levels. The spirit-sobering medicine that Li Yongheng had given Lu Feng before was a mid-grade medicine. However, it was an ordinary mid-grade medicine. Compared to the T-Rex medicine in front of him, it was a small grade lower. After thinking for a moment, even Lu Feng, who didn't need any assistance, was a little moved by this kind of medicine. However, when Lu Feng saw the price, this trace of excitement was instantly extinguished. That was because there was a long string of numbers hanging below the price. After counting a little, Lu Feng discovered that after the 4, there were actually 6 zeros. Although his father had given him 10 million, which seemed like a lot, if he wanted to buy this T-Rex medicine, he could only buy 2 bottles at most. Lu Feng couldn't accept this kind of price. After all, the effects of 2 bottles of medicine were far inferior to the results of training. After exhaling slightly, Lu Feng shrugged helplessly and finally turned to leave. This was because he had discovered that the T-Rex medicine wasn't the most expensive among these medicines. In fact, it could only be considered a mid-grade medicine. On top of this, Lu Feng even saw medicines with sky-high prices of 9 figures. Regarding these things, even if he was from a wealthy family, Lu Feng could only stare helplessly. Sigh, looks like the rich people in the Federation aren't few at all. Lu Feng turned around and walked directly to the area where the warrior training aids were. That was the place that suited him the most. When he arrived at his final destination, Lu Feng finally slowed down his footsteps. His gaze was constantly sizing up the equipment. Compared to the medicine, these equipment were undoubtedly much, much cheaper. Of course, this so-called cheap was something that ordinary people could only dream of. If it weren't for the 10 million that his father had just given him, Lu Feng probably wouldn't have dared to wander around here. Looking at the equipment, Lu Feng shook his head slightly. Below these equipment, there was a brief introduction and a price. All of these tools were extremely useful for one's cultivation. However, this extremely strong was only relative to ordinary people. Although they were also useful for Lu Fenglai, they simply couldn't reach the level of rapid improvement. Of course, some of the equipment were also extremely useful for Lu Feng. However, the price wasn't something that he could afford right now. Finally, just as Lu Feng was halfway through his stroll, he stopped. This was because Lu Feng finally saw an equipment that suited him. Looking at the huge equipment that was the size of a small house, Lu Feng finally showed a satisfied expression. However, when he saw the price, he still showed a trace of hesitation. Gravity accelerator, maximum amplification by 100 times, gravity amplification equipment. This was the most common equipment. When he was strolling around before, Lu Feng saw no less than 20 of them. However, there wasn't a single one that could meet his requirements. After all, Great Devil True Body was about extreme training. Ordinary gravity amplification was at most around 30 times. However, 30 times of gravity amplification was simply not enough to reach the extreme standard. One had to know that ordinary beginner warriors were already able to withstand 10 times of gravity amplification, and those with strong physical bodies could withstand 20 or even 30 times. Chapter 24. Lu Feng's physical strength had increased by 4 times. Therefore, a gravity increase of only 30 times or more was not enough for him to reach his limit. According to Lu Feng's estimation, if he wanted to make him feel like he had reached his limit, it would take at least 40 times. After all, his physical body had just condensed to the primitive body, which was far from the realm of the copper body great demon. His endurance was only about the same as an ordinary person. If he wanted to experience that feeling of danger, he would have to break through at least 40 times. In the equipment area of the 90th floor, among all the locations and equipment he had visited, only the gravity instrument in front of him had a gravity that was 40 times higher than normal. Of course, in addition to these, there were also many instruments that were more suitable for Lu Feng's cultivation. However, those instruments were really expensive. Lu Feng's money was still a little short. Even the gravity instrument in front of him was sold for a terrifying 9 million yuan. If this continued, he would directly spend 90% of his savings. However, when he thought of the possibility of a breakthrough, Lu Feng did not hesitate. Even if I break through to become an intermediate warrior and strengthen my physical body, my limit is probably about 80 times. At that time, this instrument should still be usable. He gritted his teeth and directly clicked on the contact on the 3-dimensional screen in front of him. After that, he waited quietly. Soon, a figure walked out of the room next to the stairs. Looking at the clothes on his body, Lu Feng knew that the person he was waiting for had arrived. Sure enough, he walked directly towards Lu Feng. After a few seconds, he stood in front of Lu Feng. He sized up Lu Feng, and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. However, he quickly hid this surprise. He asked Lu Feng politely, "Excuse me, are you the one who wants to buy this gravity accelerator?" Lu Feng nodded gently. Seeing this scene, the manager's eyes could no longer hide the surprise in them. The price of the gravity accelerator in front of him was as high as 9 million yuan. It was the most expensive gravity accelerator on the 90th floor. Ordinary people could not afford it all. Most of the equipment sold on this floor were not purchased by individuals. Their main trading partners were groups, dojos, schools, and the like. It was the first time he had seen someone like Lu Feng who wanted to buy equipment directly. Moreover, Lu Feng's age really surprised him. However, the managers of BUCC weren't ordinary people. They had seen a lot of things that ordinary people couldn't imagine. Although he was surprised, it didn't stop him. Soon, he politely asked again, "Would you like to pay in one lump sum or in installments?" Lu Feng knew about installments. In today's society, it was too easy to find out a person's location. Therefore, no organization was afraid that people would disappear after getting something. To be honest, paying in installments was very suitable for those who didn't have much money. However, Lu Feng had his own ideas. First of all, he had enough money. Although 9 million was a lot, Lu Feng had 10 million from his father. Even though he had spent 90% of it, there was still 1 million left. According to his usual lifestyle, this 1 million was enough to support him until he graduated from university. If Lu Feng wanted to let his psychic break through during this holiday, he might have left some money. However, Lu Feng also understood that if his warriors could cultivate to the high or peak level during this holiday, Lu Feng would be very satisfied. As for the rest, Lu Feng didn't want to think too much about it. Moreover, if he chose to pay in installments, the final cost would be no less than 15 million. Therefore, for Lu Feng, it was really not worth it. Therefore, he chose to pay in one lump sum. He took out his universal payment card and was about to swipe 9 million. However, at this time, Lu Feng suddenly stopped, because he thought of the VIP card. After a slight hesitation, Lu Feng looked at the manager and asked, "I don't know if there's a discount here. I have a buck VIP card. I heard from my parents that there should be a discount. I don't know if it's possible to buy these things." Hearing Lu Feng's words, the manager was slightly stunned. After a moment, he smiled gently. "If it's just a normal VIP card, then of course it's not possible. But if your VIP card level is high enough, it's still possible." Lu Feng nodded gently, took out the VIP card his parents gave him from his bag, and handed it directly to the manager. However, the manager didn't reach out to take it. Instead, he looked at Lu Feng strangely. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng felt a little strange. But soon, he saw the manager smile. "So, it's the son of the company's top management. Why didn't you say so earlier?" After saying this, the manager actually reached out his hand to help Lu Feng carry things. At this time, Lu Feng finally understood his parents' position in BUCC. Although it was just a VIP card, it didn't mean anything. However, it was enough to make the manager change his attitude immediately after seeing it. This was enough to explain some problems. Lu Feng naturally wouldn't let the manager really carry things for him. To be honest, what he wanted to do now was to quickly buy and leave, because he couldn't wait to try the effect of this gravity accelerator. "Then can I get a discount on this card? How much discount can I get?" This was the question Lu Feng was most concerned about. The manager was slightly silent. He seemed to be calculating something. In the end, he gritted his teeth and said again, "Your VIP level is extremely high in the company. Generally speaking, such a VIP card is free of charge when you buy things, but the price of this gravity accelerator is a bit too high, and this gravity accelerator is not produced by our BUCC. This is a quasi-agent, so I can't give you a free order." Although his face was still calm, Lu Feng's heart jumped slightly. Free order? Sure enough, the VIP card his parents gave him was extremely high level. However, he didn't intend to get a free order from the beginning, so he still showed an understanding smile, but he just asked again for the price. In the end, after the manager consulted the higher-ups, he gave Lu Feng a very high discount. As a result, when Lu Feng left the BUCC building, he still had more than 5 million renminbi on him. Not staying in the city, Lu Feng chose to go straight home, because the BUCC company's delivery car was still beside him. What he had to do now was to take the gravity accelerator he bought home and try it out. After sending it home and helping Lu Feng to finish the installation, it was already afternoon. Although he didn't have a good stroll in the city, Lu Feng was still very satisfied, because at this moment his mind was full of cultivation. After eating lunch, Lu Feng went to the room where the gravity accelerator was placed. The staff had already made it clear to him about how to use it, and he was also very clear about the instructions of this instrument. So, After turning on the switch, Lu Feng went straight in. The moment Lu Feng entered, he felt a kind of oppressive feeling hit him. However, this kind of pressure was still within the range that he could bear. Before entering, Lu Feng didn't get too excited. Instead, he adjusted the gravity level to 20 times. 20 times. For an ordinary beginner warrior, 10 times was already the limit. Even for an intermediate warrior, it was only 30 or 40 times. Of course, this was the limit that an ordinary warrior could bear. If it was a talented warrior, the number would be dozens of times higher. 20 times the gravity was already very scary. But for Lu Feng, it was still within the range that he could bear easily. After staying in the accelerator for a few minutes, Lu Feng felt that he had completely adapted to it. At this time, he walked out again. After a little hesitation, Lu Feng changed the acceleration level of the gravity again. This time, he didn't choose to double the gravity, but directly adjusted it to 30 times the gravity. This was already the limit of an ordinary intermediate warrior, and Lu Feng was just a beginner warrior. If it weren't for the quadruple increase of his physical strength, perhaps Lu Feng wouldn't have made such a choice. Looking at the tightly shut machine, he took a deep breath and finally stepped in. In an instant, the terrifying gravity directly hit him from all directions. At this moment, Lu Feng felt that his body seemed to be bearing tens of millions of tons of gravity. This kind of terrifying feeling was something that he had never felt before. But only to this extent, it only made Lu Feng feel a kind of strong pressure. He was still far from reaching his limit. 30 times the gravity, although I can't maintain my usual state like I did in 20 times the gravity, under such gravity, I can still hold on. As long as there is enough time, then the adaptation is completely guaranteed. However, 30 times the gravity still can't reach my limit. My physical body has a quadruple increase, even according to the ordinary standard, then I can bear 40 times the gravity. It seems that if I want to break through, I have to continue to bear it. When reaching a certain level, every doubling of gravity was a kind of terrible suffering. If the limit was 20 times, then just a mere 21 times the gravity was enough to completely crush a warrior and make his body collapse. This was like a cup with a certain volume. If it was within the tolerance range, then even if it was the limit, it could still be safe and sound. But once it exceeded this value, then it would be completely destroyed in an instant and be torn apart. A cup was like this, and so was a human body. Chapter 25. Therefore, Lu Feng wasn't in a hurry to test his limits. He chose to take it slow. 30 times the gravity. Let's get used to this level of gravity before continuing. After I get used to it, I don't think I will collapse instantly if I continue to approach my limits. As long as he didn't collapse instantaneously, he could stop completely and avoid fatal injuries. Therefore, what Lu Feng needed to do now was to slowly get used to it. First, he rested for a few dozen minutes in the 30x gravity. When he felt that his body had begun to adapt, Lu Feng immediately started to train in the machine. After a long time, when he came out of the machine, it was already nighttime. He had been in the 30x gravity for an entire afternoon. This was an unimaginable torment. To be able to do this, Lu Feng's character was tough. If it were someone else, they would have come out to rest long ago. After finishing his dinner slowly, Lu Feng didn't choose to continue training because he knew his body. Perhaps he had already adapted to the 30x gravity acceleration after an afternoon of training. However, if this continued, he was afraid that even if he could adapt to the 31x or 32x gravity acceleration, his body would still be left with certain acne. This would be a huge hidden danger for his future training path. He wasn't in a hurry for this little bit of time. After finishing his meal, Lu Feng lay on the bed and entered the Sky Network. He watched the news of the Cymbidium and the Federation. Before he knew it, 3 hours had passed. When he saw that the clock was pointing at 11 o'clock, Lu Feng left the Sky Network, lay on the bed, and slowly fell asleep. Just like that, when Lu Feng woke up, it was exactly 7 o'clock in the morning. When he felt the slowly increasing power in his body, Lu Feng smiled with satisfaction. He knew that yesterday's training had a certain effect on his body. Although it might not be very big, it was still helpful to a certain extent. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many people who use the gravity accelerator to train their bodies. Unfortunately, if he didn't reach his limit, he wouldn't be able to break through the limit. After a long stretch and breakfast, he finally began his training for the day. This time, Lu Feng only stayed in the 30x gravity for a few minutes before coming out, because Lu Feng felt that he had basically gotten used to it. This time, it's 33 times the gravity. Before 40 times, according to Lu Feng's estimation, his body was able to withstand it. Therefore, he didn't double it, but tripled it. 33 times the gravity made Lu Feng experience a strong pressure once again. However, he also understood that this gravity was still some distance away from his limit. So, he stood in the accelerator and trained again. Except for lunch at noon, Lu Feng stayed in the accelerator for the rest of the time. In this way, when he came out in the afternoon, he finally felt that he had completely adapted to it. Just like yesterday, Lu Feng did not rashly continue to cultivate wholeheartedly. Instead, he chose to rest. The third day was the same as the previous 2 days. However, this time, Lu Feng was able to adapt to the increased gravity by 36 times. The fourth day, the fifth day, the sixth day. Time passed day by day, and the acceleration that Lu Feng adapted to was still increasing. Unlike before, on the third day, after Lu Feng got used to the 36-fold increase in gravity, the increase in gravity every day doubled. He had already begun to feel the arrival of his limit. Therefore, he only doubled the amount of gravity every time. The seventh day. This day was the most crucial day of all, because this day was the day that Lu Feng stepped into the 40x gravity acceleration. 40 times. The limit of an ordinary intermediate warrior was only 30 times. Only those intermediate warriors with a certain amount of talent could try the 30x gravity acceleration after the transformation of the body. Lu Feng's body was only at the initial stage, but what he was about to enter was already the terrifying level of 40x gravity. This was already the limit that Lu Feng expected. This level of pressure was enough to make him feel the most terrifying kind of pressure. And the 41x gravity was where the real craziness came from. Lu Feng knew that only by truly stepping into the 41x gravity could he possibly be able to quickly cultivate the great devil true body and rapidly increase his warrior level. Therefore, this 40x gravity was something that he had to enter. The next moment, Lu Feng abandoned all thoughts and finally walked into it. Pressure, an omnipresent pressure. At this moment, it felt as if his body was about to be crushed. Under the 39x gravity, Lu Feng also felt that his limit was about to arrive. However, at that time, he was still able to bear it. Therefore, from the beginning to the end, he was able to persevere, and it only took him a day to completely adapt. At that time, he was also thinking about the feeling of 40x gravity. But when he started to try it, he finally discovered that under the 40x gravity, he no longer had any thoughts. At this moment, what Lu Feng felt was a kind of terror, a kind of omnipresent, terrifying pressure. It wasn't just his body. Even the organs in his body felt like they were about to shatter. In just a moment, his entire body was completely drenched. At this time, not to mention adapting, even want to take a step out, was extremely difficult. Lu Feng believed that if an ordinary intermediate warrior were to enter here, they would instantly be crushed into a bloody mist and completely torn apart. Even if he had 4 times the explosive strength in such an environment, it was still difficult to bear. However, if he retreated just because of this, then he wouldn't be Lu Feng. That kind of trash feeling, I've had enough. From the day I got the great devil true body in the primordial scripture, I secretly swore that in this life, I, Lu Feng, will never become a trash. I want to let the King District see that I, Lu Feng, am not a trash. I want to let Li Yin see that I, Lu Feng, am not a trash. I want to let the so-called family see that I, Lu Feng, am not a trash. I want to let all those who look down on me, laugh at me, and mock me see that I, Lu Feng, am not a trash. The roar spread throughout the room, faintly echoing back and forth. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes were already red. This was not only because of the terrifying pressure, but also because Lu Feng's blood was boiling. My blood is burning, my body is trembling. How can I retreat? How can I admit defeat? Finally, under this terrifying pressure, Lu Feng stepped out. In the end, he still took a step forward. Every step was accompanied by a loud roar. At this moment, he was enduring a terrifying pressure that he had never experienced before. He was enduring a pain that he had never experienced in his entire life. This is my path to the pinnacle. This is just a small stone on my path. If I can't even cross this small stone, then what hope will I have in the future? How can I talk about the pinnacle? So I have to cross it. One step, another step. Every step Lu Feng took was extremely difficult. Countless drops of sweat dripped down, soaking a large area on the floor of the apparatus. However, at this moment, he didn't look back. He didn't look back at the door he had left through. In Lu Feng's heart, in his eyes, there was only the front. He knew, he understood, that only the front was his final destination. No, he would never have an end. He had never had an end. Therefore, his footsteps would never stop. They would never stop. Just like that, Lu Feng dragged his unusually heavy footsteps as he arrived at a familiar place in an unfamiliar environment. Just like that, while sitting under this endless pressure, Lu Feng used his last bit of consciousness to slowly cultivate, according to the cultivation method of the Great Demon True Body's first level, the Copper Body Great Demon. At the very last moment, a miraculous change began to take place. Faintly, countless rays of light appeared in the air. They were sparkling and translucent, filled with a strange, ancient, and mysterious light. They danced and seemed to have discovered something. All of them went berserk and swarmed towards Lu Feng's body. In the end, they were all submerged in Lu Feng's body. Lu Feng opened his eyes and looked at his familiar surroundings. Then he slowly stood up. That pressure was still there. It was still there. However, at this moment, he no longer felt the terrifying pressure. Lu Feng had experienced this feeling several times before. It was only after he had adapted to the gravity at that time that he felt this way. This time, Lu Feng understood that he had finally adapted. 40 times the normal gravity was no longer his limit. However, after standing up for a moment, Lu Feng fell to the ground once again. Feeling his empty stomach, Lu Feng smiled helplessly. I don't know how long I've been cultivating this time. Before I came in, I could eat until I was full. I didn't expect that I would be so hungry now. However, the 40x gravity space is no longer my limit. His face was filled with joy. He knew that he had finally overcome this obstacle. He had finally taken another small step. Lu Feng trembled as he walked to the exit. After opening the door of the device, he walked out. He went to the kitchen and took out the food that he had prepared in advance. Lu Feng ate and drank like a madman. If it was an ordinary person, his body would not be able to bear it if he ate and drank so much after being hungry for so long. However, Lu Feng obviously did not have such scruples. He was a warrior, a beginner warrior, and he had such a terrifying body. The first realm of the Great Devil True Body, a beginner warrior of the Copper Body, Great Devil Minor Success Realm. What ordinary people could not bear did not mean that he could not. Soon, after wolfing down the food for a while, Lu Feng finally put down the cutlery. Touching his slightly swollen belly, Lu Feng revealed a satisfied smile. At this time, he finally raised his wrist and looked at the time displayed on the Sky Network communication device. This is a bit too exaggerated. According to Lu Feng's speculation, he had only stayed in the gravity accelerator for a day. As for the extreme hunger he felt, it was only caused by excessive cultivation. However, he did not expect that he had cultivated for so long. It's been 3 days. I didn't expect that I would cultivate for 3 days this time. Cultivation knew no time. This was a popular saying in the Federation a long time ago. However, Lu Feng did not understand it at all in the past. The first time he had such a feeling was when he had just obtained the 2 heaven-defying techniques. However, Compared to now, it was still a lot worse. After all, this time he had cultivated for 3 days directly. Phew, I've cultivated for so long this time. I wonder how effective my cultivation is? The last time I cultivated for more than a day and directly broke through to become a beginner warrior. However, it was because I had already condensed the primitive body that I could smoothly break through and directly become a beginner warrior. The effect this time should be far less than the previous time, but overall, there should be some improvement. Thinking of this, Lu Feng finally could not hold back and directly ran upstairs. Although he had not done a specific measurement, Lu Feng could feel that the power in his body had indeed increased. Moreover, the increase was not just a little bit. Even if he did not break through, the increase in power would definitely not be weaker than before. Soon, Lu Fenglai returned to the room and took out the instrument again. Looking at the instrument in front of him, Lu Feng took a deep breath and finally put the instrument on his body. However, in an instant, the familiar ding sound rang out. At this time, a number appeared on the display. Lu Feng wasn't as hesitant as before. He looked over directly. However, this glance made Lu Feng slightly stunned. He could feel the increase in his physical strength, but he did not expect the increase to be so obvious and so huge. A number was clearly displayed on the display, and the first number was actually 134. This was Lu Feng's current fleshly body strength. 134. Previously, after his breakthrough, his physical strength was only a little more than 1 star, and even just reached the standard of 1 star. In the following days, although he had cultivated in the gravity accelerator for some time, he was far from reaching his limit during that time, so the effect was minimal. Chapter 26. After 7 or 8 days of cultivation, the increase in strength was basically nothing. In total, it didn't even reach 0.05 stars. If it was an ordinary beginner warrior who cultivated so hard in such an environment, he would probably increase his strength by at least 0.1 stars. But Lu Feng only increased his strength by less than 0.05 stars. For him, this was quite a blow. Lu Feng once thought that because he cultivated the great devil true body, the difficulty of cultivation was much higher than others. However, after the extreme training this time, he had completely changed his view of it. A supreme strong technique was a supreme strong technique. Its terror was not only reflected in the terrifying increase in strength and the heaven-defying blessing in the aspect of cultivation speed, it was also in line with the heaven-defying identity. Only in an extreme environment can my cultivation improve at the fastest speed to an unimaginable level. And if I were to cultivate in an ordinary environment, my speed of improvement would be even slower than the most ordinary warrior. The essence of the great devil true body was to make use of all the dangerous environments to become stronger and break through the limits. But in an ordinary environment, the effect was minimal. If I can maintain this speed in the future, then I'm afraid that in less than 10 days, I can reach the peak of the first realm of the great devil true body, the Copper Body Great Witch. The peak of the Copper Body Great, which was an extreme realm belonging to the peak of the first realm. As long as he cultivated to the peak, he could completely break through and become a Gold Body Great Witch. And once this realm reached the peak, Lu Feng believed that he would become a second-rank warrior. And once he cultivated to the peak, perhaps he would become a peak existence among second-rank warriors. Moreover, Lu Feng urgently wanted to cultivate to the peak of the Copper Body Great, which, not just for the level of intermediate warrior. What he valued more was the supreme magical power that came with the peak of the Copper Body Great Witch. The Great Bronze Body. This was the terrifying magical power that came with the peak of the Copper Body Great Witch. Although Lu Feng didn't know the terrifying extent of this magical power, but just by looking at his own space of thought, that terrifying giant used the Great Bronze Body Great, which, its terrifying strength could be imagined. Of course, Lu Feng also understood that the giant's existence was too high. He was able to use such a powerful force, but that didn't mean that Lu Feng could do the same. However, Lu Feng firmly believed that as long as he used this supreme divine ability, his battle prowess would once again rise to a terrifying level, causing others to tremble in fear. Once I've rested enough, I'll continue cultivating. During this holiday, I must reach the realm of great success. I must become an intermediate warrior. After secretly swearing an oath, Lu Feng entered the Sky Network and started to watch the news of the past few days. Every time he entered, Lu Feng's cultivation time decreased. It wasn't that he didn't want to cultivate on purpose, but it was because the time he took to wake up from cultivation was getting shorter and shorter. At the same time, the effects of each attack also began to decrease. This was Lu Feng's first month of vacation. This time, he only cultivated for half a day before coming out. Looking at the number 7:13 on the screen, Lu Feng finally gave up on the idea of continuing his cultivation. Today, he had already become a high-level primary warrior. This kind of speed, no matter where he was, would undoubtedly be extremely terrifying. From the time he became a primary warrior until now, it had only been a month's time. But in this 1 month, he had completed the transformation from a low-level primary warrior to a high-level primary warrior. However, this kind of abnormal speed finally completely disappeared a few days ago. Since a few days ago, Lu Feng's increase in cultivation became less and less each time. In the end, it was only an increase of a few tenths of a star. This kind of speed was unacceptable to Lu Feng. He understood that after these days of cultivation, his limit had already increased. It had increased to a level that surpassed his previous level. Even if he didn't become an intermediate warrior and didn't improve his body, but because of Great Devil True Body, he had already begun to subtly change. A mere 40 times gravity was no longer a threat to him. Therefore, if he still wanted to make rapid progress, he simply couldn't do it in a mere 40 times gravity space. He needed to continue to challenge the next level. Great Devil True Body is indeed terrifying. Ordinary cultivation requires a lot of time and energy to break through a small level. But Great Devil True Body, as long as every level is successfully cultivated, then the so-called barriers above the warrior level are simply a joke. For me, they don't have the slightest bit of hindrance. Breaking through from 2.99 stars to 3 stars, and from 6.99 stars to 7 stars. These were the two barriers between the low level and the middle level, and between the middle level and the high level. Although these barriers couldn't compare to a warrior's breakthrough. But if an ordinary person wanted to complete it, then they would need a lot of time. But for Lu Feng, they were completely ignored. When he broke through, he completely ignored the existence of these barriers. From 2.99 stars to 3 stars, and from 6.99 stars to 7 stars, the breakthrough was completed almost instantaneously. Therefore, for Lu Feng, the existence of those small barriers between the warrior levels was completely ignored. This was indeed terrifying enough. Okay, today I'll rest. Starting tomorrow, I'll officially attack 41 times the gravity acceleration. I must become a middle-level warrior before school starts. After secretly making up his mind, Lu Feng didn't think about anything else. It was only noon now, and Lu Feng didn't want to cultivate now. This month's hard training had allowed his level to rapidly increase. Although this was very exciting, it made him excited. But at the same time, he also felt tired. Lu Feng also wanted to relax a little. He didn't continue to stay at home. He left the villa, feeling the scorching, hot air outside. Lu Feng didn't feel much discomfort. He was already a high-level beginner warrior. Even under 40 times the gravity, he could almost do it freely. Just a change in the normal range of temperature was no longer enough to make Lu Feng feel uncomfortable. Last time I didn't play properly. This time I'll make up for it. Then today, I'll play to my heart's content in the city. Thinking of this, he didn't hesitate and directly went to the road outside the villa, waiting for the public suspension car to arrive. This wait lasted for 15 minutes. Listening to the complaints of the residents around him because of the hot weather, Lu Feng's mouth curved slightly. In the past, he was like these people, constantly complaining because of the change in the weather. But now was different. He had reached the level he was now, and he was already beyond the scope of ordinary people. Finally, the public suspension car arrived, and Lu Feng followed the crowd and finally squeezed to the top. This time, there was no space on the top. Lu Feng could only stand in it and feel the squeeze of the crowd. In the suspension car, all kinds of complaints came out, nothing more than who squeezed who stepped on whose feet. And along the way, Lu Feng was also stepped on many times. After a long time, they finally arrived at the destination. The moment the car door opened, Lu Feng had to use his physique to force his way out. The last time he came here was just after the holidays. At that time, most people weren't on holiday yet. But this time, it was already the time when most companies were on holiday. Therefore, the number of people coming to the city center every day was a lot more than usual. Finally squeezing out the car door, Lu Feng stood in the parking lot and took a few deep breaths. For Lu Feng, he would rather directly challenge the 41 times gravity acceleration at home than continue to suffer like this. It seems that it's still necessary to buy a suspension car. In the Federation, as long as you were 16 years old, you could get a driver's license. And Lu Feng took the test when he was just 16 years old. He could even quickly learn how to operate those mechas and small battleships. So for the suspension car driver's license, there was no problem at all. After taking the test, Lu Tao also said that he wanted to buy Lu Feng a suspension car, but at that time, Lu Feng spent most of his energy on training, and the school was not far from his home, so in the end, he refused. And this time, after experiencing this kind of ordeal, Lu Feng finally decided to buy his own suspension car. Last time I bought the gravity accelerator, I spent more than 5 million. I now have close to 5 million left. Although I can't use all of it to buy a car, but it's still enough to buy a decent one. The price of a normal suspension car for civilian use was around 100,000, and those that were slightly better were around 300,000. As for the more expensive ones, they were tools that belonged to the slightly richer people. Of course, there were luxuries everywhere, and suspension cars were one of the most commonly used tools, so naturally, they were also objects to show off. Therefore, there were also many suspension cars that were abnormally expensive. But this time, Lu Feng only planned to buy a hover car that was not too shabby. After experiencing so much, he had long since lost the desire to show off like his peers. Perhaps Lu Feng would not buy a car that cost 100 to 200,000, but he also would not choose those luxury products that cost millions. Standing in the parking lot, Lu Feng opened the Sky Network map that he carried with him, and finally found the nearest suspension car sales center. Feeling that the place was not very far from here, Lu Feng did not go to the crowded public suspension car. Following the directions, Lu Feng chose the nearest roads and finally arrived at his final destination. Looking at the spacious Crystal Plaza, Lu Feng sighed softly. This was the suspension car sales center closest to the platform, and also the largest one in the entire city. There were many types of suspension cars for sale here, and almost all of the more famous brands in the Federation could be found here. Chapter 27. In this suspension car sales center, there were cheap and expensive ones. There were even many suspension cars below 100,000 that commoners used. And the most expensive ones were the noble suspension cars that were worth tens of millions or even hundreds of millions. Of course, they also have more expensive suspension cars, but that kind of suspension car needs to be customized in advance before they can be shipped to you. Of course, this type of suspension car wasn't something that Lu Feng would consider. Although his family was rich, Lu Feng also understood that with his parents' salary, it would be impossible for them to buy a suspension car that was close to 100 million. Even if he could afford it, he wouldn't be able to bear the heavy taxes and the necessary maintenance costs. And Lu Feng had never planned on buying a suspension car to show off. After all, his identity as a psychic was the biggest show-off. Just as Lu Feng was looking around, a salesperson walked over. "Sir, would you like to buy a suspension car, or take a look at it in advance?" It had to be said that this salesperson's words were very appropriate. She was asking if he wanted to buy it directly or take a look at it in advance. She was asking to take a look at it in advance, not because she thought he couldn't afford it. Without a doubt, these words made people feel very comfortable. Lu Feng smiled slightly, looked at the young and beautiful salesperson, and said, "I want to buy a suspension car directly." After saying this, Lu Feng clearly felt a flash of light in the salesperson's eyes. He also knew that when buying suspension cars here, as salespeople, they would receive a certain commission. So when she heard that Lu Feng wanted to buy directly, she was naturally very happy. Then what price are you planning to buy? The choice of price was directly related to how much commission they received. If Lu Feng directly bought a suspension car that was over 100 million, then she would receive at least a few million commission. Here, her monthly salary was only around 5,000 yuan. Lu Feng didn't hesitate. Before coming here, he had already planned it out. So when the salesperson asked, Lu Feng directly answered, around 500,000 to 800,000. 500,000 to 800,000. This was the price Lu Feng had in mind. Although he was short on money, this few hundred thousand was nothing compared to the amount he needed to level up. Moreover, Lu Feng did not intend to let himself suffer. Buying a suspension car that cost more than 500,000 renminbi wasn't to flaunt his wealth, but for his own comfort. After all, the price was there. No matter what, there would be value and enjoyment equivalent to the price. Lu Feng's answer made the waitress's eyes shine brighter. Every time she sold a suspension car, she would get a commission of at least 1%. And if Lu Feng really bought a suspension car that cost more than 500,000 yuan, then the commission from just one purchase would be more than her salary. In that case, sir, please follow me this way. The waitress stepped to the side and opened up a path for Lu Feng. Following the female attendant's guidance, Lu Feng headed straight for the deepest part of the Crystal Plaza. Most of the cars in the periphery were ordinary suspension cars, and their price did not exceed 300,000 yuan. And only inside, there were real aristocratic cars. Gradually, there were fewer and fewer cars around, but Lu Feng knew that the price of any car here was much higher than those outside. Finally, they reached a place where there were fewer people. The two stopped. Sir, most of the cars here are between 500,000 and 1 million yuan. You can choose the car type and color you like here. If it's suitable, we will complete all the procedures for you as soon as possible. Hearing the words of the salesperson, Lu Feng nodded slightly. He knew that suspension cars were not the same as other things. If he wanted to buy one, he had to make a record. Every suspension car had a microchip implanted in it, and its function was to locate the car. In the current era, suspension cars had become one of the necessary tools for almost everyone. So the sales of suspension cars were also very large. It was also because of this that it took a lot of time to make a record. Lu Feng obviously did not have that much time to wait for these things to be processed. The reason why he chose to buy these more expensive suspension cars was because he liked their one-stop service. With the salesperson beside him, Lu Feng constantly shuttled through the entire exhibition area. The salesperson beside him also constantly introduced everything to him. None of these suspension cars cost more than 800,000 yuan, but in Lu Feng's eyes, he really liked them. Finally, just as Lu Feng was halfway through, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Seeing Lu Feng's actions and eyes, the salesperson's eyes flashed with a hint of a smile. She had seen this kind of expression before, and she liked it, because all of this meant that she was about to earn another sum of money. This suspension car is a custom-made fantasy series suspension car by ICZ Company specifically for young people. Whether it's the shape or the design, it was created according to the most popular trends. The fantasy series suspension car can float up to 300 meters in the air, and its stability is much higher than the Dream series. Its top speed can reach 1,100 kilometers per hour. It can be said that among the cars that young people under 1 million yuan like, it has the best price-performance ratio. When Lu Feng heard this, he nodded slightly. Indeed, if what the attendant said was true, then this fantasy series was probably one of the most cost-effective models among all the young suspension cars in the same price range, perhaps even below 1 million yuan. Also, its shape and price were exactly what Lu Feng liked. Because the price of this fantasy series suspension car was only 650,000 yuan. 650,000 was already a terrifying number for an ordinary family. After all, the average income of Cymbidium residents was only around 40,000 yuan per year. For most families, a suspension car worth 650,000 renminbi was simply unaffordable. But this was nothing to Lu Fenglai. Without hesitation, Lu Feng said, "Then, I want this suspension car. Help me with the paperwork." Before Lu Feng could finish his words, an arrogant voice rang in his ears. When they heard this, not only Lu Feng, but even the salesperson next to him frowned. Because when Lu Feng looked at this suspension car, there was no one next to it. But now this voice was so domineering, as if it didn't see Lu Feng at all. Lu Feng and the salesperson turned around and looked at the owner of the voice at the same time. But with one look, Lu Feng frowned slightly, because at this moment, there was not one person in front of him, but a group of people. However, Lu Feng felt that these people were behaving strangely at this moment. That's right, it was weird, extremely weird. They were clearly dressed in formal attire and dressed like successful people. But in Lu Feng's eyes, they didn't look like successful people at all. If he had to say, these people looked more like hooligans. "You guys," Lu Feng opened his mouth, his brows still furrowed. At this moment, he really felt very uncomfortable, although he was far more mature than his peers. But no matter what, he was still a 17-year-old young man. And this kind of young man often represented hot-bloodedness. There was another explanation for hot-bloodedness, which was called impulsiveness. For small things, they would often disregard everything. Although Lu Feng wasn't that extreme, he still had his own temper. So at this moment, Lu Feng was still a little angry. Hearing Lu Feng speak, the person with the most distinguished status just glanced at him and didn't pay attention anymore. He looked at the salesperson and said, domineeringly again, "I want this suspension car. Help me with the paperwork. This is my birthday gift to my son. Hurry up, I don't have that much time to wait." Hearing this, the salesperson was slightly stunned. She could be a salesperson here, so she could say that she had seen a lot of people. Her view was the same as Lu Feng's. She also felt a sense of hooliganism from these people. However, even though she felt it, she didn't dare to be like Lu Feng and say anything. After all, for someone as young as Lu Feng to be able to casually take out more than 600,000 yuan to buy a suspension car, he must have a certain background. And she was just an ordinary person. In the face of these powerful people, she didn't have the power to resist. After a slight hesitation, the salesperson picked up the Sky Network in her hand and directly contacted the department manager. At this moment, in her heart, she already hated these people to the extreme. If it weren't for them, how could her 6,500 Federation dollars have disappeared like this? "Can't you hurry up? I still have to take my son to celebrate his birthday." Seeing the hesitation of the salesperson, the leader finally got impatient. He pulled a young man who was about the same age as Lu Feng and kept urging the salesperson to hurry up. Until now, Lu Feng didn't say anything, because he also wanted to see what this suspension car sales center would do. A moment later, a man ran over here. Although he didn't know him, Lu Feng could still tell that this was the manager here. From this person, he saw the same temperament as the BUCC manager. These two, they were probably the same type of people. Sure enough, when the man arrived, the salesperson was obviously relieved. She jogged to the man's side and softly told him what just happened. And the manager kept nodding. After a while, he finally walked over. At this time, the man was obviously completely impatient. He looked at the manager and nodded lightly. He said, "You're the manager here, right? Then hurry up and do it for me. I don't have much time to waste." Chapter 28. Hearing this, the manager's expression didn't change at all. He kept smiling as he looked at the two of them. After the man finished speaking, he said, "Sir, I'm really sorry. We have a rule here. This gentleman chose it first. If you want to buy it, you'll have to wait for this gentleman to make his decision." After saying this, the manager looked at Lu Feng. Lu Feng shrugged his shoulders lightly and said with a calm expression, "I also like this fantasy series suspension car very much. I was planning to buy it just now. Now, naturally it's the same. Can I trouble the manager to help me with the procedures? I also want to leave as soon as possible." Hearing Lu Feng's words, the manager still had a smile on his face. He nodded lightly, then turned around and said a few words to the waitress beside him. After that, she turned around and left. "Sir, I'm really sorry. Since this young gentleman has already bought it, then this fantasy series suspension car now belongs to him. If you want to buy it, you can wait a few days. We'll be able to deliver it in a few days. Seeing that everything was done, the man from before was clearly stunned. After a while, he finally recovered, but his face was clearly filled with anger. Are you playing with me? Do you know who I am? Do you know the consequences of doing this? At the end of his words, he was even slightly roaring. But in the face of this, neither Lu Feng nor the manager had any reaction. They still had the same expression as before. Still smiling at the group of people in front of him, the manager slowly opened his mouth. But in this voice, Lu Feng could clearly hear a hint of coldness. Sir, are you threatening me? Please have some self-respect. The moment the last 4 words came out, a powerful aura suddenly erupted. Faintly, it formed a vortex of aura. Such a scene made those people and Lu Feng slightly stunned. They opened their mouths to say something, but in the end, they didn't say anything. From the eyes of those people, Lu Feng saw an emotion called fear. Intermediate warrior, Lu Feng said solemnly. He didn't expect that the manager of this hover car sales center was actually a warrior, and even a mid-level warrior. Mid-level warrior. Perhaps it was nothing in the eyes of the entire Federation. However, in the Cymbidium, he was considered a big shot. The ratio of warriors to ordinary people was 100:1. The entire Cymbidium had a population of 1 billion, and there were tens of millions of people who could become beginner warriors. But the majority of these 10 million warriors were only beginner warriors. Or in different places, the ratio of primary warriors to intermediate warriors was different. However, in the Cymbidium, the ratio was as high as 50:1. In other words, the entire Cymbidium had at most 200,000 warriors. Moreover, more than 99% of these 200,000 intermediate warriors were concentrated in the first-class cities in the central cities. In other words, the number of mid-level warriors in this city was no more than 2,000. Moreover, the reason why mid-level warriors were so frightening was not because they were few in number, but because they were powerful. A mid-level warrior could easily crush 10 beginner warriors. Seeing the gentle manager become a mid-level warrior in an instant, those people were slightly frightened, but they quickly calmed down. Because in their camp, there was a burst of aura that was not the slightest bit weak. Another mid-level warrior. Lu Feng's mouth hung a trace of an indescribable smile. He also didn't expect that he would encounter 2 mid-level warriors when he just casually came to buy a hover car. It must be known that most warriors had their own social circles, and their living environment was completely different from that of ordinary people. Generally, the two sides rarely came into contact. But at this moment, in this hover car sales center, he actually encountered 2 warriors, and they were even mid-level warriors. This was a bit interesting. You are a mid-level warrior, and I'm also a mid-level warrior. Perhaps your strength is a bit higher than mine. However, I have already comprehended a cultivation method. Although it is only the most basic of beginners, it can still increase a bit. Therefore, you don't have the qualifications to clamor in front of me. He walked out of the crowd and stood directly in front of that group of people. At this moment, a lot of people who came here to look at the cars were attracted. To be able to enter here, they more or less had a certain status in the circle of ordinary people. However, for them, the title of warrior still had a certain degree of deterrence. Therefore, in the end, these people only looked from afar and never dared to approach. Hearing the words of the mid-level warrior, the manager was slightly silent. Indeed, although he might be a bit stronger in strength, but if it was really as the opposite person said, that he had comprehended a cultivation method, then the manager was afraid that he might not be a match for him. After all, he had only become a mid-level warrior and hadn't comprehended any cultivation method. If he could comprehend it, he probably wouldn't have come here. Seeing the manager's silence, the mid-level warrior slightly smiled, with a kind of pride after victory. He turned to look at Lu Feng and continued to use his powerful aura to oppress Lu Feng. Now we will spend 700,000 to buy the hover car in your hand. Is this okay? For Lu Feng, although he was a mid-level warrior, he didn't want to offend him too much. After all, to be able to casually take out $650,000 to buy a hovercar at such a young age, he must be a person with a certain background. It was obviously irrational to completely offend such an unidentified person for a hovercar. Therefore, he thought that speaking like this with his identity as a mid-level warrior was already a concession. After hearing this, the people around thought the same as the mid-level warrior, and they all thought that this was the best solution. At this moment, everyone looked at Lu Feng, and so did the manager. After all, he was already the most powerful person in this sales center, and he didn't want to completely offend a mid-level warrior who had comprehended a cultivation method for the sake of Lu Feng, whose identity was unknown. The price was $650,000, and he gave $700,000 to Lu Feng, which was a direct profit of $50,000. If it was for ordinary people, it was indeed very good. But those who could stand here and buy cars were not ordinary people. And would Lu Feng be a person who lacked money? Therefore, in the face of everyone's gazes, Lu Feng just smiled gently. He looked at the manager and asked, "Manager, I wonder if the procedures have been completed? I still have to leave." Lu Feng's words made everyone slightly stunned, but they all quickly reacted. At this moment, they looked at Lu Feng with all kinds of complicated expressions in their eyes. It was sympathy, and it was ridicule. The manager was also slightly stunned, but he quickly replied, "It should be done soon. But young man, I still advise you, don't make a choice that you will regret in the heat of the moment." The manager was different from those ordinary rich people. In his eyes, Lu Feng was obviously not a foolish person. What he saw was Lu Feng's arrogance. It was the kind of arrogance that would not compromise in the face of anything. But obviously, now was not the time for him to be arrogant. The manager's words made Lu Feng nod gently. To be honest, he couldn't blame the manager's final approach. After all, they were businessmen, and what they pursued was the greatest benefit. Obviously, offending a mid-level warrior for a young man who didn't know anything was not in line with their interests. However, that last sentence still made Lu Feng feel a trace of goodwill. "I know all this. I'll wait here. When it's done, send the suspension car's crystal card over. I'm also planning to leave." Lu Feng's words made the manager sigh. He glanced at Lu Feng, then at the mid-level warrior, and finally opened his mouth to say something. "This is the suspension car sales center under the Chimu company. If someone causes trouble here, then I can't handle it. Someone from the top will handle it." After saying this, the manager looked at Lu Feng and finally stopped talking, standing to the side. His words were already very clear. He wanted to take advantage of this last opportunity to help Lu Feng a little, and this was already his limit. Hearing the manager's words, the mid-level warrior frowned slightly, but didn't say anything. Chimu Company was one of the few big companies in this starry sky. Although it couldn't be compared to BUCC, a giant trans-galaxy conglomerate, in the eyes of ordinary people, it was still a giant. Not to mention that he was just a mid-level warrior. Even if he became a warrior, in the eyes of such a giant, he was still not enough. So, when he heard the manager's warning, although he felt uncomfortable, he couldn't say anything. He just looked at Lu Feng with a more vicious gaze, as if he wanted to transfer all the humiliation he suffered to Lu Feng. However, in the face of such an attitude, Lu Feng still looked indifferent, as if all this had nothing to do with him. Not long after, the waitress had already sent everything over. She handed the crystal car in her hand to Lu Feng and casually transferred 650,000 yuan to Lu Feng's card. "Sir, now this suspension car belongs to you. You can drive it out of here. In this car sales center, it's not allowed to drive out casually." But at this moment, the manager still opened his mouth to remind Lu Feng to drive out of here directly. After all this happened in their place. If something really happened to Lu Feng, then they would be implicated to a certain extent. And this was also what the manager didn't want to see. So in the end, he still opened his mouth to remind Lu Feng to drive away quickly to avoid this disaster as much as possible. Chapter 29. However, Lu Feng only smiled gently at all of this. "Don't bother. After all, you still have rules here." Please send the hover car to the door. I'll drive it away. Lu Feng's words made the manager shake his head gently. He did everything he could and said everything he could. Lu Feng didn't appreciate it, but he couldn't do anything about it. After waving to an employee beside him, he didn't do anything else, and Lu Feng saw that everything was ready. He didn't stay and walked directly outside. But this time, there were a lot more people moving with him. Beside him, not only the manager and the people confronting him, but also many people who wanted to watch the fun left together. Just like that, the group of people followed closely behind Lu Feng and walked towards the door in a mighty manner. Soon, the group finally walked out of the door. At this time, the hover car hadn't been sent yet, but the problem that needed to be solved had already begun. Finally, no longer suppressing his momentum, all of his aura oppressed Lu Feng. A trace of bloodlust flashed in the eyes of the intermediate warrior. He said slowly, "Although killing is not allowed in the Federation, it's still okay to teach you a lesson. Kid, you have to remember, there are some things that you can't just let your emotions affect your decisions. And there are some people that you can't afford to offend." At this moment, many people behind the intermediate warrior showed a grim smile. They seemed to see Lu Feng's miserable appearance about to appear. Finally, looking at the indifferent smile that could even be called almost disregarding, the intermediate warrior couldn't bear it anymore. In an instant, a powerful punch was thrown. This punch brought about the sound of the wind. Even the air was faintly rubbed against each other. However, seeing this scene, the manager breathed a sigh of relief, because he could feel the power of this punch. This punch was obviously not the full strength of the intermediate warrior. He didn't even use 1/10 of his strength. This punch was only between 2 to 3 stars of strength. And this was enough to show that the intermediate warrior really only intended to teach Lu Feng a lesson and didn't have the intention to kill. The manager believed that since the intermediate warrior was able to comprehend the cultivation method, then his control over his strength was already very strong. Since he didn't intend to kill Lu Feng, then under this punch, Lu Feng would probably only be seriously injured. Finally, in that instant, before most people could even see it, the punch landed right in front of Lu Feng. "Is this how you want to teach me?" "Huh." The crisp sound was so clear in this stagnant atmosphere. It was so clear and so refreshing. At this moment, everyone stared blankly at the scene before them. They couldn't believe what they were seeing, because the current scene was so strange. In everyone's eyes, they simply didn't see the scene of Lu Feng's flesh and blood flying everywhere. They didn't even see him seriously injured. What they saw was only 2 palms and 1 fist. Of the 2 palms, one was holding the fist tightly. The other palm was placed in front of the fist's owner. These people knew that the crisp sound just now was caused by the collision of the 2 palms. This was originally nothing, but the owner of that palm was not the person they imagined. At this moment, the intermediate warrior was standing in place. On his face, a bright red handprint was so striking that it seemed to describe the strength of the palm just now. Lu Feng smiled slightly. With a light step, he had already retreated a few meters away. Until this moment, the onlookers finally understood what had just happened. One by one, they sucked in a mouthful of cold air. Looking at Lu Feng, their eyes were full of a kind of look called horror. They were all ordinary people and didn't understand the strength levels of warriors. But they all knew that the one who had rushed to attack was an intermediate warrior. However, his punch not only didn't hurt the young man in front of them, but was even slapped in the face. Thoroughly, from the body to the soul, it was a double slap in the face. Could it be that this young man was also an intermediate warrior? The manager looked at Lu Feng with some surprise. He naturally had good eyesight. He could see that the power of that blow was only at the standard of 2 to 3 stars. But even so what? Even if it was only at the strength of 2 stars, it wasn't something that an ordinary person could block. And Lu Feng could so easily grab it, and even slap the intermediate warrior in a split second when he was stunned. This was enough to show that this young man was at least an intermediate beginner warrior. Even more, it was very likely that he was a beginner warrior who had learned martial arts. How old is he? In his eyes, Lu Feng had changed. If he was only a beginner warrior, Perhaps he would be a little surprised and nothing more. After all, he had seen such young beginner warriors before, and not in the minority. To be able to become a beginner warrior at this age, he could only be regarded as a regional genius. But he didn't dare to really see it that way, because he suspected that Lu Feng was a beginner warrior who had comprehended martial arts. Comprehending martial arts, this was a little scary. Among beginner warriors, those who could comprehend martial arts were less than 1%, and those who could comprehend beginner martial arts were even less than 1 in 1,000. After all, comprehending martial arts meant that it could increase one's strength. It meant that within the same level, one could have the strength to crush the opponent. If Lu Feng was really a genius who had comprehended martial arts, then he wouldn't just be a regional genius, but a city-level genius. In terms of status, the young man in front of him was only a beginner warrior, but he was much more respected than the average intermediate warrior. In a flash, the manager had thought so much. But as a beginner warrior, the beginner warrior who was slapped by Lu Feng didn't have any thoughts. Of course, he couldn't completely say that. He might have some thoughts, but those thoughts were already insignificant in the face of such a huge humiliation. You are courting death. In the next moment, the most powerful force erupted. This was the most powerful outbreak of a beginner warrior, the condensation of all his strength. Even from his body, one could feel a kind of powerful blessing. Without a doubt, he had already used martial arts. Feeling this shocking aura, the manager's face changed greatly. At this moment, Lu Feng's position in his mind was infinitely high. Such a person was definitely the descendant of a famous family. If something happened to him, then he would definitely be implicated. Therefore, without the slightest hesitation, the manager directly used all his strength and faced the beginner warrior's powerful blow head-on. It was just a pity. He was the last to attack, and the strength he gathered was limited. In a hurry, he couldn't compare with the beginner warrior who had used martial arts and erupted all his strength. But at the moment of contact, everything was broken. Even the most basic resistance couldn't be achieved, and the manager directly flew out. Along the way, blood was everywhere, gushing out from his mouth. That beginner warrior's strength had reached 40 stars, plus the double amplification of martial arts. His blow was terrifying to the extent of 80 stars. Coupled with the burning anger, this blow faintly had the strength of 90 stars. 90 stars of strength. That was such a terrifying number. Under one punch, even a small building would be completely smashed and turn into ruins. One could imagine the destruction caused by such a blow on a person's body. Many onlookers had already screamed, and those behind the beginner warrior who stirred up trouble were also pale. They knew that this matter was really over. They had the same thoughts as the manager. They couldn't bear the consequences of the revenge. But at this moment, it was already impossible to stop it, although the beginner warrior was by their side. Looking at him, who had fallen into madness at this moment, these people understood that there was nothing they could do. Die! An angry roar reverberated throughout the surrounding space. Vaguely, this powerful roar caused many onlookers to continuously retreat. Powerful, powerful! This was the power of a beginner warrior. They used all their strength, and even a building would be turned into dust in an instant, leaving no trace behind. A strike as high as 90 stars stirred up a lot of dust and filled the air. The fist had not yet arrived, but it had already affected many people around Lu Feng. They were affected by the powerful fist wind, and all of them vomited blood and were sent flying. Finally, under everyone's watchful eyes, the fist arrived. Lu Feng didn't move. From beginning to end, he stood in the same place. He stood quietly and watched quietly. Then he quietly raised his arm and quietly waved his fist. But at this moment, it changed, completely changed. In an instant, all the indifference was gone. All the tranquility was annihilated. Die! The same roar came from Lu Feng's mouth. And that tranquil punch, at this moment, had completed a complete transformation. Endless violence appeared, endless bloodthirsty ferocity. It was shocking, full of indomitable courage, full of peerless sharpness. In an instant, the sharpness bloomed. A terrifying wave of air appeared, and there was even a short space explosion, causing the surrounding to be cleared in an instant. Endless panic appeared, and almost all the onlookers were injured to a certain extent, flying out one after another. Broken, completely broken. At this moment, the beginner warrior fell to a place far away, looking at the violent figure in horror, full of a kind of horror. He had never felt like this before. He had never been completely defeated by such a punch. Perhaps that punch had indeed condensed the essence of many techniques within it, but at the moment of collision, there was no technique to be seen. That was completely the ultimate violence, completely possessing the most violent means, completely tearing everything in front of it into pieces. Chapter 30. It was only a moment of contact, but he could feel his body being seriously injured and his arm being shattered. Such a blow should not, absolutely should not appear on such a young body. You're a high-order mid-level warrior. You are a high-order mid-level warrior who has comprehended a cultivation method. Apart from this, he could not think of anything else, because the feeling that such a terrifying and violent punch gave him was that of a peerless edge. Such a blow had at least the strength of 100 stars. 100 stars of strength belonged to the domain of a high-order warrior, and the young man in front of him obviously had not become a high-order warrior. He had only reached such a level through amplification, so he was afraid that he was really a high-order mid-level warrior. Lu Feng stood in the same place. His body was obviously calm, but it was surrounded by countless violent and ruthless auras. This was a contradiction, but at this moment, it was so harmonious that it was difficult to distinguish, and it was impossible to explain. After a moment, when the violence was extinguished, when the flames of anger calmed down, Lu Feng returned to his previous appearance. He looked at the frightened mid-level warrior and just smiled coldly. High-order warrior? If he had become a high-order warrior, then the punch just now would have directly smashed him into pieces. I didn't expect that just after breaking through, such a sparring partner would come my door. It seems that my luck is really good. Before Lu Feng left, he had already reached the realm of a high-order junior warrior, and his physical strength had reached the standard of 7 stars. However, his physical strength of 7 stars did not mean that he only had 7 stars of fighting strength. His physical strength had increased by 4 times, plus the limit of his cultivation method had increased by 4 times. The terrifying degree of his amplification was as high as 16 times. Therefore, the actual strength of his most violent punch was 16 times that of his physical strength of 7 stars. In other words, the actual limit of Lu Feng's punch just now had reached the terrifying limit of 112 stars. 112 stars against 90 stars. Plus Lu Feng's terrifying and tenacious primitive body. So under this punch, the mid-level warrior was directly beaten to the brink of collapse. Gradually, those who had fallen to the ground struggled to sit up. Just now, they were only affected by the terrifying collision and did not receive much damage themselves. Gradually, everyone recovered, but the horror in their eyes did not recede. Everything that was happening before his eyes was a little too inconceivable. The previous manager was a mid-ranked warrior. He didn't even have the slightest power to fight back in front of the mid-level warrior. He was completely defeated with just one blow. Originally, they thought that the youth's fate was to be severed into pieces, but who would have thought that the real strongest person was actually that youth? In the face of such a powerful and unparalleled attack, in the face of such an explosive and unavoidable killing intent, what he did was very simple, but it was also incomparably shocking. That was to use the most violent method to forcefully crush all obstacles. This kind of battle was shocking and made people's blood boil. In the blink of an eye, these people looked at Lu Feng with eyes full of awe. Or maybe he was just a junior warrior, and that was just to get their respect. After all, to be able to become a junior warrior at such a young age, he could be regarded as a little genius in the city. But what Lu Feng did was to blow up a powerful warrior who could defeat a mid-ranked warrior with a single punch. Was this kind of strength not enough to win their respect and fear? Standing in place, looking at the mid-level warrior who didn't struggle for a long time, Lu Feng didn't retaliate in the end. In his heart, such a person didn't have the slightest meaning. Although he wanted to kill himself, Lu Feng's punch had already made him collapse. Even if his injuries could be healed, he was afraid that he would never be able to recover his current strength in this life. Such a punishment was enough for a warrior. Now, in Lu Feng's eyes, he was a cripple. Moreover, Lu Feng wasn't stupid. If he killed the mid-level warrior in front of him, he would also violate the law and cause a lot of trouble. Therefore, whether it was psychologically or behaviorally, Lu Feng didn't want to kill him. After taking a deep look, Lu Feng no longer paid attention to him. Turning around and walking towards the seriously injured manager, Lu Feng reached out a hand to pull him up. His face once again showed the sunny smile that a youth should have. "Thank you for just now." Hearing Lu Feng's words, the manager smiled slightly, but this smile was full of bitterness. He gently shook his head and said, "Actually, I should be meddlesome. How could a genius like you be so ignorant?" Genius, a peerless genius. At this moment, in the eyes of this manager, Lu Feng had already become a peerless genius on the level of a planet. Others didn't understand, so they couldn't see anything, but how could he not see the existence of a mid-level warrior for a long time? Lu Feng's blow had indeed reached a terrifying attack of more than 100 stars, but this didn't mean that he had become a high-level warrior. The manager saw clearly that Lu Feng's true ultimate strength hadn't even reached the threshold of a mid-level warrior. The biggest reason why he could erupt with such shocking strength was the increase of invincibility, the increase of the cultivation method, plus the increase of his own talent. All of this added up allowed him to erupt with more than 10 times the violence with his body strength of less than 10 stars. All of this undoubtedly showed that Lu Feng was a genius, a peerless genius with both his aptitude and perception. And this, compared to Lu Feng being a high-level warrior, was much more shocking. After all, cultivation could rely on the accumulation of various resources, but talent and perception were basically destined from birth. With such talent, he was bound to be a powerhouse whose name would shake a part of the starry sky in the future. Hearing the manager's slightly self-deprecating words, Lu Feng still had that kind of gentle and sunny smile. He said, "In short, I still want to thank you." Lu Feng had always been grateful to people who had helped him. "How are your injuries? Do you want me to help you call the hospital's ambulance organization?" Now, the manager's appearance was indeed very miserable. However, Lu Feng could vaguely feel that his injuries weren't so exaggerated. That was why he said a few words to him first. The manager shook his head, took out a bottle of purple medicine from his pocket, opened the bottle cap, and drank it in one gulp. After a few moments, a trace of red began to appear on his pale face. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng knew that he should be fine. "Since there's nothing else, I'll leave first. Sorry to trouble you today." In fact, today's matter had little to do with Lu Feng. From the beginning to the end, he only came to buy a car and didn't do anything else. So to speak of responsibility, it was the responsibility of those who provoked him before. However, all of this was caused by him after all. Therefore, Lu Feng still felt a little guilty in his heart. Turning around and looking at the trembling people over there, Lu Feng's face showed a trace of ridicule. Their current appearance was a stark contrast to their previous arrogant and despotic appearance. It was as if the two were not the same group of people. Gradually, Lu Feng walked to their side. Although they were all standing there, in everyone's eyes at this moment, it was as if Lu Feng was looking down on them. "Since you have money, and all of this was caused by you, then the rest of the compensation will be handed over to you. There's no problem." Problem? How could there be a problem? Even if Lu Feng didn't say anything, then all of the responsibility should be borne by them. After all of this was seen by others, and there was also surveillance in the sales center. Even if they wanted to avoid it, they couldn't. What's more, Lu Feng's punch had shattered their reliance and shattered the last barrier in their hearts. Moreover, at this moment, As long as Lu Feng could let them go, let alone compensation, they were willing to pay 10 times or 100 times more. Nodding with a pale face, Lu Feng saw this scene and finally didn't say anything. He turned around and left here, walking toward the hover car that had just been sent out. In this way, under everyone's gaze, Lu Feng walked onto the hover car and left here. What kind of family is he from? He actually came to our Cymbidium. According to the company's internal news, that person seems to have resigned from the capital's mission, and the place he chose to live in seclusion is this small galaxy. Although it's not necessarily the Cymbidium, it's not impossible. Could it be he also came for that person? Flying all the way, Lu Feng was really satisfied with the performance of this hover car. Whether it was speed or the ability to fly, this fantasy series was very much to Lu Feng's liking. At this moment, he was flying about 30 meters above the ground, and his speed had reached 500 kilometers per hour. It seems that having a hover car is really convenient. It's so much more comfortable compared to when I was flying. When he came, he was squeezed with so many people. Even after becoming a high-order beginner warrior, Lu Feng still felt that it was hard. But in the future, he wouldn't have to suffer like this anymore. After buying a hover car, he could go anywhere he wanted. It took him nearly half an hour to get there. But on the way back, it took him less than 10 minutes. There were no obstacles along the way, and Lu Feng stopped the hover car in the courtyard. Closing the car door, Lu Feng went back to his room. It was still very early, and Lu Feng didn't plan on continuing to break through the shackles today. This day was a rare holiday for him. Sigh, it's a pity that Yonghyun Kid went to train in the army. I don't have any good friends. Looks like I can only stay at home. After thinking about it, Lu Feng still couldn't think of anyone to play with. In the end, he had no choice but to enter the Sky Network and start a play. Chapter 31. On the first day, Lu Feng got up on time. Today was a new starting point and a new height for him. On this day, he was going to break through to a new realm. That was the limit. It was a number that surpassed his previous absolute limit. 41 times the acceleration of gravity. 41 times the acceleration of gravity was undoubtedly a terrifying number. Although his physical body already had the strength of more than 7 stars, the endurance of his body was still the same as before. Until now, Lu Feng hadn't increased his physical strength in order to cultivate quickly in the gravity accelerator. If he wanted to, he just needed to train his body and increase his physical strength to the corresponding level. 41 times the gravity wouldn't be a problem for him at all. After adjusting the acceleration of gravity to 41 times, Lu Feng didn't go in immediately. Instead, he stood at the entrance of the accelerator in silence. His current physical strength was still the same as before. Although he had already adapted to the 40x gravity, it was still his limit in the end. If it was his limit, as long as he was resolute enough, he could still get through it. However, it was now 41 times. Although it had only increased by 1 time, it had already exceeded his limit. In such an environment, he was in danger of dying at any time. Should I go in or not? Standing at the entrance, Lu Feng hesitated slightly. He knew that even if he didn't go in, his future would still be bright. Risking one's life and death was nothing more than an increase in speed. Was this worth it? At this moment, Lu Feng thought about a lot of things. However, in the end, he still didn't step in. In his mind, many scenes appeared, alternating and crisscrossing. In the final moment, 3 figures appeared. The look in their eyes caused Lu Feng's heart to ache in anger. Their behavior made Lu Feng feel humiliated and crazy. If I can't even cross such a small limit, how can I talk about the path to the peak? I'm already too far behind them. If I retreat like this, what right do I have to look down on them? Could it be that I still haven't forgotten the feeling of being a waste? Don't tell me you want to experience that painful experience again. No, I definitely can't. This is just a small obstacle. I, Lu Feng, am destined to look down on the universe and take the final step. How can I shrink back at this moment? At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a trace of madness. Was it crazy? It was crazy. Risking his life just to increase the speed of his cultivation was a little crazy. But so what? Since the ancient times, those heroes of the human race, those peerless god kings, which one of them didn't hover between life and death? Which one of them didn't break through in the midst of endless dangers? The path to the peak is destined to be filled with countless shackles. What I want to do is to break all the shackles and walk to the peak of everything. Therefore, this time, Lu Feng, is destined to succeed. In the end, Lu Feng still took a step forward. In an instant, his vision blurred. Lu Feng finally felt it. He finally felt that kind of extreme pain. This kind of pain, this kind of bitterness, was no longer limited to his physical body. Even his soul seemed to have been eroded endlessly, as if it was about to collapse and be completely crushed. He used the last of his strength to curl his lips into a smile. At this moment, he felt helpless. Lu Feng hadn't expected that going beyond the limit would be so terrifying that he didn't have the slightest ability to resist it. He had been cultivating under 40 times the gravity for a long time. Although he couldn't say that he had completely adapted to it, he wouldn't be unable to accept it like before. However, Lu Feng really hadn't expected that just doubling the gravity would bring about such a different feeling. He actually felt a kind of threat, the threat of death. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng didn't give up. He never knew what it meant to give up. At this moment, a strange smile appeared on Lu Feng's face. He said slowly, in an extremely weak voice that only he could hear, going beyond the limit 41 times. This feeling is very good. I can feel that my strength is slowly increasing. Here, I can finally break through once again. Until now, even after feeling the threat of death, Lu Feng still didn't choose to leave. He still endured this endless pressure and began to cultivate crazily, wandering on the edge of death, cultivating in the abyss of shattering. Lu Feng's cultivation finally went beyond the limit. The strength of his physical body was increasing at a terrifying speed. This was something Lu Feng had expected. It was just that the pain he was enduring was too much. If not for the support of his terrifying willpower, he definitely wouldn't have been able to persevere. Lu Feng understood that if his willpower collapsed, his body would instantly be crushed into powder by this powerful gravity. Therefore, rather than saying that it was a warrior's cultivation, it was better to say that it was an impact of willpower. Finally, after cultivating for half a day, Lu Feng chose to leave at the moment when he felt that his body could no longer bear it. The moment he walked out of the passage of the apparatus, Lu Feng directly fell to the ground. Sweat instantly gushed out, soaking the ground. He struggled to get up, but Lu Feng realized that it was all in vain. He was now on the verge of collapse. It took him an entire morning to cultivate, but it took Lu Feng an entire afternoon to recover to the point where he could move on his own. It wasn't until nighttime that he was finally able to stand up and walk to the kitchen. After eating all the stored food and feeling that he was slowly recovering, Lu Feng returned to his room. He took out the apparatus and tested it again. Looking at the number on the monitor, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with excitement. Although it was really painful compared to the gains, it was really worth it. On the monitor, a striking number was displayed: 8, 12, 8, 12 stars. After an entire morning of cultivation, Lu Feng's strength had increased by 1 star. This kind of speed of increase was terrifying and shocking. Even if he had condensed the primitive body and had a terrifying cultivation speed on the path of a warrior, according to the normal cultivation method, it would be impossible to increase 1 star without 1 or 2 months. If it was an ordinary beginner warrior, the time would probably be doubled. But now, in just 1 morning, Lu Feng actually directly saved 1 or 2 months of cultivation time. This was undoubtedly a pleasant surprise and terrifying. It's a pity that this kind of speed of increase will only appear at the beginning. In a few days, I'm afraid it will slow down again. I don't know if I can break through this time and cultivate the first stage of the Great Devil True Body to the realm of Copper Body, Great Devil. In Lu Feng's heart, the so-called warrior level was nothing. He knew that his foundation was the Great Devil True Body. As long as he continuously broke through the great devil true body, even if he was forever a beginner warrior, it was nothing. After all, the great devil true body power was much stronger than the so-called warrior system. At night, Lu Feng didn't enter the Sky Network because he didn't have that much strength left. Very quickly, he directly fell into a deep sleep. The next day, when Lu Feng woke up, it was already afternoon. But this time, he didn't get up as smoothly as usual. His whole body felt like it was about to collapse. After a long time, he finally slowly got up. Feeling the state of his body, Lu Feng helplessly smiled bitterly. Looks like I'm going to be crippled today. I didn't expect that this kind of cultivation that surpassed the limit would be so powerful. Although the increase in strength is indeed terrifying, the side effects are also difficult to accept. Lu Feng understood that the current state of his body was simply not suitable to continue cultivating. If he continued, he was afraid that it would cause a certain amount of damage to his body. It might even leave behind some hidden injuries. If he forcefully cultivated like this for the sake of a little increase in strength, it would really not be worth it in the future. Therefore, Lu Feng decisively gave up on the idea of cultivating today. Lying on the bed, he took out the Sky Network and contacted a few shops that he usually visited. After buying more than 10 days of food in one go, Lu Feng entered the Sky Network. Standing in the virtual space, he casually flipped through the scrolling news in front of him. Lu Feng sighed softly. He knew that many of the reports on the news were not true. Some of the news was just deliberately created by the government to cover up some of the truth. But even so, what could he do? He was just looking at it. Just as Lu Feng was feeling bored, he suddenly saw the Sky Network's headlines refresh. Seeing this, Lu Feng quickly clicked on the news that just appeared. Ancient ruins have been discovered at the edge of the Yuan-Qing galaxy. It is suspected to be a place where a civilization of the previous era gathered. There are many obstacles around the ruins, and the excavation work is very difficult. So far, there are no traces of any civilization around the ruins. However, according to the Federation scientists, this ancient ruin has great research value. There may be many unique relics of the previous civilization in it, and it may be of help to the Federation's technology. Therefore, the government's army is currently heading towards the Yuan-Qing galaxy, preparing to do their best to excavate. He continued to click on it, but what appeared next was only an introduction about the Yuan-Qing galaxy, a galaxy at the edge. After browsing for a while and getting a general idea, Lu Feng could not find anything else about the ruins. In the end, Lu Feng could only click on the close button helplessly. I didn't expect that another ancient ruin would be discovered. This time, the Federation will be in an uproar. Chapter 32. Ruins were the traces left behind by many civilizations after they had been destroyed. Civilizations that could form had their own characteristics, and the ruins of their civilizations that could be passed down all contained the essence of their race. Many of the Federation's peak cultivation techniques, medicine production methods, and technology were excavated from ruins discovered in the Milky Way. Generally, the appearance of a ruin represented the birth of a benefit. And this time, the ancient ruins that appeared were suspected to be from the previous era. The previous era. Even after an era, it still left behind its own traces. Just the ruins themselves had terrifying value. If something really appeared in them, then any one of them would cause a sensation in the Federation. There were records of this in the Federation's past history. The humans had several ancient and powerful peak overlords, the Divine King. They had all relied on the ancient remnants of the previous eras to finally reach the peak of the immortal realm and become the peerless Divine King that billions of creatures looked up to. Lu Feng could imagine what kind of turmoil the Yuan-Qing galaxy would experience in the following period of time. This time, not only would the Federation's government, the various large families and terrifying corporations go crazy, but even the powerful races of other galaxies would also go there. After all, this was very likely to be the temptation of the Divine King, although this was only an extremely small possibility. But as long as the Divine King was involved, It was enough to make any race go crazy. When he heard the notification, Lu Feng logged out of the Sky Network. He dragged his tired body to the door and took back the food he needed. After hastily eating, he went to rest in advance. After resting for 2 whole days, he finally recovered from the extreme fatigue. This also made Lu Feng understand the horror of training beyond his limits. However, although he didn't want to experience that kind of feeling again, Lu Feng still threw himself into training beyond his limits in order to be able to cultivate faster. The 41-fold training lasted for more than 10 days. In the past 10 days or so, Lu Feng had gradually gotten used to it and had entered it 6 times. When he walked out of the gravity accelerator for the 7th time, Lu Feng finally gave up on the idea of continuing to cultivate. He could feel that there was almost no increase in his physical strength this time. This started from the 4th time. However, after 3 consecutive training sessions that exceeded his limits, his strength did not even increase by 0.01 stars. This finally made Lu Feng understand one thing. It seems that as long as I don't cultivate the copper-bodied great demon of the great demon true body to greater mastery, I won't be able to make a breakthrough. However, I'm afraid I won't be able to break through just by relying on the acceleration of gravity. Although he wasn't bothered by the shackles of warriors, Lu Feng still needed to break through. His breakthrough was even more terrifying. Compared to the breakthroughs of these warriors, it was several times or even dozens of times more difficult. Looking at the 99-foot displayed on the device, Lu Feng finally gave up. He knew that as long as he did not break through to the next realm, his strength would always be at 99 stars. It seems that if I want to become an intermediate warrior before school starts, I still need a certain amount of luck. If I just cultivate at home, I'm afraid there won't be any possibility of a breakthrough. He sighed softly. After cultivating for more than 40 days, Lu Feng had gone from a beginner warrior to the peak of a beginner warrior, and was only 1 step away from breaking through. Lu Feng could be considered to have created quite a miracle among ordinary people. There's still about a month left. I can't waste this time. In that case, I'll make use of this period of time to properly hone my combat skills and cultivation method. If I wait until I become an intermediate warrior, I'm afraid that this set of combat skills that I created myself will almost be equivalent to no longer having any amplification ability. If Lu Feng entered the Federal University, then, with his status, wanting to obtain an intermediate or even an advanced cultivation method wouldn't be a problem. However, Lu Feng also knew that although those cultivation methods might be a lot more powerful than the cultivation methods he created himself, they might not necessarily be suitable for him. After all, for such cultivation methods to fully display that kind of amplification ability, it would take a lot of time to comprehend. However, the cultivation methods he created and condensed didn't have such restrictions. Only the cultivation methods he condensed were truly tailor-made for him, truly suitable for him, allowing him to erupt with a miraculous battle strength. Therefore, Lu Feng might choose to cultivate other cultivation methods, but his most important cultivation methods still had to be comprehended and condensed by himself. Although this was an incomparably difficult path, Lu Feng firmly believed that one day he would definitely be able to reach the peak of extreme Tao. Actually, compared to others, I'm already very lucky. After all, in addition to cultivating cultivation methods, they also need to cultivate body cultivation methods. As for me, with the great Devil True Body, I've already saved a lot. Cultivation methods were divided into body cultivation methods and battle cultivation methods. Generally speaking, both were equally important. However, in many people's eyes, body cultivation methods couldn't compare to battle cultivation methods. After all, body tempering cultivation techniques were generally not changed. In fact, every body tempering cultivation technique had certain special conditions to cultivate. Battle cultivation methods were different as long as one's perception was enough. One could completely comprehend them. What's more, many people's aptitude was already destined to be unable to reach the peak even if they were given the best body cultivation methods. Therefore, most warriors' attention would be focused on battle cultivation methods. After all, battle cultivation methods could directly give warriors the most direct help, allowing them to display an amplification in battle. Ordinary body cultivation methods can only support warriors to reach the peak of advanced warrior. As for those body cultivation methods that can help warriors become warriors, they are really too rare. Moreover, if one wants to cultivate, one must also meet the special conditions of those cultivation methods. For example, my great devil true body needs to be condensed to be able to cultivate it. I'm afraid that in the entire Federation, except for me, no one else can cultivate it. The limit of the great devil true body is definitely not just the level of a warrior. Even the extreme divine martial realm might not be the limit. After all, just the great success realm of Copper Body Great Demon is already comparable to an intermediate warrior. According to this level, as long as I cultivate to the Great Star Wizard realm, I believe that I've already stepped into or even surpassed the divine martial realm. However, all of this is just my imagination. The specific effects will only be known when I really set foot on that day. With this great devil true body, I've really saved a lot of trouble and trouble. At least I don't have to abandon my previous body cultivation methods and change to other cultivation methods in order to break through the warrior level. If one cultivated an ordinary body cultivation method, then at most one would become a peak advanced warrior. If one wanted to break through, not only would they need to accumulate a lot of physical strength, they would also need the help of a higher body cultivation method. And if one was lucky enough to obtain a suitable body cultivation method, then they would need to abandon their previous body cultivation method and start cultivating from scratch. Although abandoning the previous body cultivation method would not weaken a warrior's battle power, it would take a really long time. After all, one would need to start cultivating from scratch. In addition to the body cultivation methods that could allow one to break through and become a warrior, this caused the ratio of advanced warriors to warriors in the entire Federation to reach an astonishing 1,000 to 1. This was almost equivalent to the ratio of psychics to warriors. And this was also the reason why warriors had such a high status in the Federation. Of course, other than this, the terrifying nature of warriors after becoming warriors was also one of the reasons why they had such a high status. In that case, I'll enter the virtual battle space in the remaining time and polish my body cultivation method to the highest level. I'll strive to break through when I break through. The virtual battle space was one of Lu Feng's favorite places. It was the virtual battle space that he frequented the most besides the Sky Network. In the past, Lu Feng would log in every day. In that almost equal place, he could perfectly display his battle talent and temporarily forget the fact that he could not cultivate. Being able to condense his own body cultivation method was also the result of thousands of battles in the virtual battle space. And now, in order to improve his body cultivation method, once again, Lu Feng still went there. With the body cultivation method that I've condensed, I'm afraid that only the top 100 existences will be worthy of a real battle. After all, only the top 100 existences have comprehended at least the body cultivation method. Lu Feng also knew that although the virtual battle space included almost 1/10 of the people in the Symbidium, the true geniuses and powerhouses almost never entered it. The last time I entered the virtual battle space, my opponent was an advanced warrior, but he did not comprehend any body cultivation method, not even the body cultivation method. In normal times, such an advanced warrior would probably be an ordinary person. To be able to cultivate to the advanced warrior level and be slightly more talented, I'm afraid that he would at least comprehend a body cultivation method. So, the warriors in the virtual battle space are just some ordinary people. Just fighting with them is no longer enough to hone my body cultivation method. If I want to break through, I need a true genius to join me. But how can I attract those people? Lu Feng also knew that those true geniuses would not come to a place like the virtual battle space. To them, the virtual battle space was simply a child's toy. Any intermediate warrior at the genius level would have comprehended a body cultivation method. And once they entered the virtual battle space, they would at least be in the top 100 existences. As for those advanced warriors, they were even more shocking existences. Although they were of the same level of strength as others, once they used intermediate body cultivation methods, they would be able to completely sweep away others, making them tremble and unable to resist. Sigh, I can only think of a way to attract their attention. Chapter 33. Lu Feng's contact with the circle was extremely limited. Previously, in the eyes of many people, he was just an ordinary person, so he couldn't get in touch with the circle of warriors. So now, he couldn't think of any way to get in touch with them, even if it was just a beginner warrior. After all, in everyone's eyes, even a beginner warrior was no longer the same as an ordinary person. Actually, it might be possible to find Yongheng, but he's now training in the army and can't be contacted in the short term. Lu Feng knew that perhaps Li Yongheng could be considered a figure in that circle, but he couldn't get in touch with him for a while, so he could only think of other ways first. Putting on the helmet, he directly entered the virtual battle space. Looking at the countless challenge messages in front of him, Lu Feng didn't choose immediately. Fighting with some ordinary people was just a waste of time. He couldn't do any improvement or help at all. Therefore, Lu Feng directly ignored those who ranked below the top 1,000. Only those in the top 1,000 were the ones he needed to fight. Those in the top 1,000 should be people who have comprehended combat skills, but they're still a certain distance away from comprehending beginner techniques. Only those in the top 100 may be people who have at least comprehended beginner techniques. Then my opponents will be them. At this moment, Lu Feng had already decided on his opponents. For him, only those warriors who have comprehended techniques are qualified to be his opponents. Opening the search engine, he looked for the top ranking of those challengers. But to Lu Feng's disappointment, none of the challengers were ranked in the top 100. The one who was ranked at the top was only a warrior who was ranked 227. Lu Feng took a quick look at his battle records and a few battle videos. He had already lost all interest in him. He was sure that this warrior ranked 227 might be on the verge of comprehension, or after a few battles with people of the same level, he was very likely to comprehend a beginner combat skill. But now, he definitely still hadn't comprehended it. Fighting with him, Lu Feng didn't even need to use all his strength to win easily. He closed the challenge list. Lu Feng pondered for a moment. Finally, when Lu Feng raised his head again, he had already made up his mind. Since they didn't challenge me, then I'll challenge them? Challenge? Let's challenge then. What was Lu Feng afraid of? The next moment, Lu Feng opened the battle ranking list in the virtual battle space and directly found the top 100 existences. Lu Feng looked at the introduction and couldn't help but mutter, First place, Spectral Warrior, level unknown, number of battles, 1, wins, 1, win rate, 100%, average time spent defeating opponent, 1, 7 seconds, second place, Guiltless Breeze. Level unknown. Battles 844. Wins 844. Win rate 100%. Average time taken to defeat opponent, 1. 9 seconds third, Wan Yu. Level unknown. Battles 19. Wins 19. Win rate 100%. Average time taken to defeat opponent, 2. 1 seconds. Looking at the combat data of these people, Lu Feng took a deep breath. At this moment, he finally understood how terrifying those people at the top of the rankings were. The first-ranked Spectral Warrior only fought 11 battles and actually became the number 1 character. The average time taken for him to defeat his opponents was only 7 seconds. This is too terrifying. In this way, in these 11 battles, he didn't take more than 9 seconds to fight against the previous number 1 on the battle ranking list. At most, he only took 9 seconds to completely defeat the previous number 1 on the battle ranking list. What kind of existence is this Spectral Warrior? From the beginning to the end of the battle, the system would pause for 1 second. This also meant that even in theory, the time taken to defeat the opponent was at least 1 second. And this Spectral Warrior took an average of 7 seconds. In other words, he had defeated all his opponents in less than 19 seconds. Excluding those 10 battles, he only took less than 9 seconds to fight against the previous number 1 on the battle ranking list. This was a bit too shocking. Could it be that he's a warrior? The previous number 1 on the battle ranking list should at least be an advanced warrior who comprehended an intermediate cultivation technique. However, he couldn't even last 9 seconds against him. This meant that he had at least comprehended a high-level cultivation technique. And the advanced cultivation technique he comprehended isn't an ordinary one either. It's very likely that it's an advanced cultivation technique. Indeed, in the virtual battle space, the power of an advanced cultivation technique is at least 100 times more than a beginner cultivation technique. Even an existence who comprehended an intermediate cultivation technique wouldn't have the slightest ability to fight back against such a powerhouse. In the virtual battle space, everyone's physical strength was 1 star. The higher the level of their cultivation technique, the more terrifying the power they could unleash. An existence who comprehended an intermediate cultivation technique, even if he was only a beginner warrior, could easily crush an advanced warrior who only comprehended a beginner cultivation technique in the virtual battle space. This was the charm of the virtual battle space. Lu Feng could only guess this about the spectral warrior. As for the second place, Qing Feng Wuzue, he should be much more normal. But I think he's at least an advanced warrior who comprehended an advanced cultivation technique. As for the third place Ruanyu, she should be the same as the first place spectral warrior. It's very likely that they're both true geniuses. The advanced cultivation technique they comprehended is definitely an advanced cultivation technique of the star grade. As for the top 10, they must be existences who comprehended those powerful intermediate cultivation techniques. However, their data is much more normal. Their combat experience is absolutely terrifying. I'm afraid they're all true combat geniuses, and I shouldn't be able to fight with them now. But after a period of fighting, as long as I condense my cultivation technique again, it might not be impossible. Lu Feng's greatest advantage, as well as his greatest terror, was his terrifying perception. As long as he was given some time, he would be able to obtain the experience he needed through continuous battles. Then, he would be able to continuously condense his own exclusive cultivation technique until he had the ability to fight with warriors who had comprehended advanced cultivation techniques in the virtual battle space. If I can contact and challenge the top 3 existences and win, then I might be able to cause enough of a stir. By then, I won't have to worry. There should be enough qualified people looking for me. Before my cultivation technique enters the star grade, the virtual battle space will definitely have an unimaginable effect on me. By then, I can spend even more money on upgrading the warrior's physical body. These days, Lu Feng had finally understood the existence of psychics through the heavenly network. Therefore, in the aspect of psychics, as long as he showed a certain amount of talent, he would definitely be able to obtain unimaginable resources. By then, the Federation's subsidies that he obtained through psychics could be used to upgrade the warrior's level. In the Federation, the status of psychics was too high. Just the fact that the ratio of psychics to warriors had reached 1,000 was enough to prove their rarity. And what determined their status wasn't the scarcity of psychics, but their usefulness. There were 2 main reasons why psychics were so highly respected. One of them was their combat power. Although a low-level psychic didn't have much ability to fight back, and would even be completely defeated by warriors of the same level, there was a prerequisite for this. The prerequisite was that there was no technological assistance. In comparison, the existence of psychics was most suitable for war and not for small-scale conflicts. A high-level psychic could skillfully operate a medium-sized warship independently after systematic training. One had to know that a medium-sized warship would need at least 3,000 professionals who had undergone many years of systematic training in order to unleash its maximum combat power. Moreover, the coordination of 3,000 professionals was far inferior to the flexibility of a high-level psychic controlling the warship. The power of a medium-sized warship might not be able to fight against a warrior with a martial path avatar, but against a high-level warrior, it would result in a crushing outcome. Even if faced with dozens or even hundreds of high-level warriors, a psychic with the help of a warship would definitely not lose. This was the terror of psychics. They represented the terrifying characteristics of technology, and warriors represented the ultimate ability of martial arts. A few thousand years ago, there was a super war that shook the entire universe, and it was also in that war that all races witnessed the terrifying power of psychics. That was a great psychic who was about to step into the final realm. At that time, the Human Federation was threatened by the alien race and was in an unprecedented period of danger. That was a new and powerful race, and among them, there was an existence at the level of the Divine King. And the great Divine King of the Federation, the Divine King of the Celestial Vault, had mysteriously disappeared. Humanity was in an absolute crisis, and there was even the danger of extinction. It was also at this time that he stood up. That great psychic who was comparable to the Divine King stood up. In the Battle of the Black River Galaxy, he had single-handedly controlled the last 30-star fortresses of the Federation, tens of thousands of cosmic warships, and more than 1 billion high and low-class warships, as well as countless mechas to snipe the main force of the alien race. In the end, he had used the last of humanity's technological power to directly crush the alien race's delusion of annihilating humanity. Although more than 70% of the technological power he had brought with him had been lost, the main force of the alien race's expedition was almost completely annihilated. After that, the Divine King of the alien race had descended, and the terror of a psychic in the later stage was fully revealed to all humans at that moment. He had relied on his own strength to battle the Divine King of the alien race in the Silk Galaxy. The two of them had almost smashed the Silk Galaxy, which was comparable to the Milky Way galaxy, into pieces. The outcome was beyond everyone's expectations. The Divine King of the alien race had quietly retreated, and the psychic had also returned safely. It was also from then on that people knew that after a psychic became a god, their power would increase exponentially, and in a battle of the same level, they would be stronger than a warrior for the first time. And psychic who had reached the pinnacle had received the most widespread title today, the Supreme of the Alien Path. Chapter 34. Generally, after becoming an advanced psychic, the Federation government would give a few million Federation dollars as an additional subsidy every year. Once one became a psychic grandmaster, one wouldn't have to worry about any resource issues. Although the government wouldn't give any support after becoming psychic grandmaster, it didn't mean that the psychic grandmaster wouldn't receive any resources from then on. On the contrary, the real resource supply started from the psychic grandmaster. If a psychic grandmaster chose to join any corporation, family, or government, they would receive an almost unlimited supply of resources. That was because the existence of a psychic grandmaster was already valuable enough. Because once a psychic grandmaster became a psychic grandmaster, then his second value would be reflected. Just like how warriors had supreme martial arts incarnations when they became martial artists, once they surpassed the advanced psychic grandmaster, then the psychic grandmaster would also have his own magical power. The magical power of a psychic grandmaster was called spiritual materialization. As the name implied, after becoming a psychic grandmaster, the psychic grandmaster's spiritual power could be completely released and basically materialized according to his thoughts. Originally, materialization wasn't a big deal. In the early days, psychic grandmasters couldn't compare to warriors and martial artists. Even if they had the magical power of spiritual materialization, it was still the same. After all, even materialized, terrifying things didn't necessarily have all the power of an illusory existence. Once they met a warrior with the magical power of martial arts, then they would still be defeated. However, this situation was completely changed about 10,000 years ago. What changed this was civilization. It was the civilization of the Fourth Era, refining and alchemy. After discovering those ancient secret techniques, The Federation government and various big families and corporations tried to turn these ancient civilizations into something they needed. Unfortunately, after hundreds of years of experiments, they all ended in failure. Because humans found that although these things seemed simple, they were extremely complicated. Relying on human technology alone couldn't restore the original appearance. However, although they couldn't completely restore it, humans still thought of their own way. That was improvement. And it was also at this time that the status of psychic grandmasters officially began to rise, and finally became an existence that far surpassed warriors. Alchemy and refining required a kind of power to control. This was a kind of extremely fine control, and even relying on the power of technology couldn't perfectly solve it. After all, many accidents could happen during the refining process. As for technology, it was usually programmed. Even the so-called artificial intelligence was just programmed by humans in advance. When it came to things that were difficult to control like alchemy and refining tools, these artificial intelligence were still helpless. However, just because AI technology couldn't do it didn't mean that humans couldn't do it themselves. Psychic masters with strong spiritual power were not included in this list. Since they were able to materialize their minds, they were naturally able to perform the most minute control that technology could not. A psychic grandmaster was a terrifying existence that could independently control a large warship. Generally, large warships would require at least 100,000 people to operate. Such meticulous control was far from what ordinary technology could compare to. From this, the terror of a great psychic master could be seen. Using their terrifying and meticulous control, they were able to perfectly simulate the formation time and degree of fusion of the lines in the refining process and the medicine in the refining process. Generally speaking, objects that have been enhanced by vein carvings would have different characteristics due to the different vein carvings, and their sturdiness and strength would also be greatly enhanced. A normal mech inscribed by a god-level psychic could even increase its power by 100-fold without any changes. This was without a doubt extremely terrifying. As for the medicine that was personally made by a psychic, the effect was even more heaven-defying. In addition to the medicine's medicinal properties being increased by several times, it could even prevent many sequelae. As for the top-notch medicine, such as the legendary and mythical level medicine, it required the existence of a psychic to successfully make it. The emergence of the veined refining technique and the medicine improvement technique finally made the status of a psychic unsurpassable. It became the most respected profession in the Federation. Of course, not all psychic grandmasters could control it. However, the status of a psychic grandmaster who mastered either of the two techniques was not much lower than that of a peak martial artist. After all, with such ability, it represented shocking wealth and great hope. Therefore, it was precisely because of these two reasons that psychic grandmasters could be said to be the most respected in the Federation. Lu Feng was confident, although his psychic talent might not be very strong. However, he believed in his ability to comprehend. Relying on this ability to comprehend, he believed that it was possible to cultivate the primordial scripture to a certain extent. Relying on the primordial scripture, then his future would definitely not stop at the ranks of advanced psychic grandmasters. Therefore, in his future cultivation, he did not have to worry about any problem of resources for psychic grandmasters cultivation. What he wanted to do was to spend all the resources and money that he obtained before becoming an advanced psychic grandmaster on the advancement of his warrior level. Thinking of this, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a hint of excitement. Since everything was already very good, then what he needed to do now was to fight and fight. He wanted to strive to be able to condense and evolve his own techniques when he became an intermediate warrior. Since he had already thought of a way, then there was no need to continue waiting. In the next moment, Lu Feng directly checked the existence of the top 100 online. After a slight hesitation, Lu Feng finally chose a warrior named Feng Suiying Di. According to the data displayed in the virtual battle space, he had fought more than 10,000 battles, and his winning rate was as high as 98%. His displayed level had also reached the level of an advanced warrior. An opponent like this should be able to let me fight to my heart's content. That's fine, before I have the qualifications to challenge the three of them. I'll use these people as practice. Without hesitation, Lu Feng directly sent a challenge message, and it was also at this moment that the virtual battle space's information bar actually showed the news of Lu Feng challenging Feng Shuiying Di. Although it was not the headline, it was still in a conspicuous position. This was the treatment of the top 100. The battle between them symbolized the highest level of battle in the virtual battle space, and every time it appeared, the system would automatically release an announcement so that everyone who paid attention to them could receive the news in a timely manner. Although Lu Feng was not a warrior in the top 100, because of his terrifying winning rate, his reputation in the virtual battle space was no less than the average warrior in the top 100. Therefore, the news of this challenge quickly spread in the virtual battle space. Standing in the virtual battle space, Lu Feng did not accept anyone's challenge, but waited quietly. He knew that Feng Shuiying Di would not reject his challenge. Finally, just as the attention was getting higher and higher, Feng Shuiying's message that he agreed to the battle came. At this moment, in the most conspicuous position of the battle space, a huge message appeared. 105 warriors, peerless cutting edge, will fight in 10 minutes. 71 warriors. Feng Shuiying Di. Peerless cutting edge was Lu Feng's ID in the virtual battle space. The appearance of this message attracted the attention of many people. Although these two people's rankings were not very high, in the virtual battle space, there might not necessarily be a battle between the top 100 in a few days. Therefore, the attention of this battle was still very high. Many people connected the window to the system's designated channel, quietly waiting for the battle to begin. As for Lu Feng, he had also entered the battle interface. The next moment, the surrounding environment began to change, entering a new and unfamiliar environment. At this moment, Lu Feng was standing alone under a vast sky. I've long heard that every battle between the top 100 would have a certain degree of publicity, and the venue of the battle would also be in a specific environment. I didn't expect this to be true. Looking at this vast field of vision, thinking of the simple space during the battle, Lu Feng's mouth showed a trace of a pleasant smile. There were still more than 9 minutes before the start of the battle, and at this time, Lu Feng closed his eyes slightly, and a peaceful atmosphere appeared around him. His opponent was definitely a high-level warrior who had comprehended a beginner cultivation technique. If such an opponent's beginner cultivation technique was very profound, then Lu Feng would need to fully concentrate on the battle. Therefore, he had to let himself enter the peak state before the battle, so that he could erupt with the most powerful battle strength in the following battle. Time slowly passed, and the moment the countdown ended, a figure appeared under the virtual sky. Lu Feng still did not open his eyes. He was like a still picture, quiet and peaceful. Peerless cutting edge, I've heard of you before. Among the warriors outside the top 100, apart from those hidden geniuses, you should be the strongest one. It's just that I didn't expect you to actually challenge me. I've already seen a few of your previous battle recordings, and you shouldn't have comprehended a beginner cultivation technique yet. I really don't know where you got the confidence to challenge me. You have to know, I'm a high-level warrior who has comprehended a beginner cultivation technique. Looking at the still calm Lu Feng, Feng Shuiying frowned slightly and said slowly, "There's less than 10 seconds left. I hope you can still be this calm when the time comes. Soon, following the end of the countdown, all battles were limited to all contact." And it was also at this moment that Lu Feng's eyes suddenly opened. Everything changed. What quiet and thin, what indifferent and calm, all of it disappeared at this moment. Berserk. Yes, it was berserk. At this moment, looking at the figure that stood up in an instant, Feng Shuiying felt berserk. He didn't understand how someone could perfectly combine the two temperaments of calm and berserk and be able to complete such an extreme transformation in an instant. Chapter 35. However, such a change obviously did not affect Feng Shuiying. He was only stunned for a moment and quickly recovered. Although he said that he was disdainful of Lu Feng, he would never underestimate his enemy in battle. After all, countless people had been defeated because of underestimation. Therefore, he used his full strength at the peak of his peak state. Fight! A roar was heard. The next moment, his figure blurred and disappeared on the spot. This was the embodiment of the essence of a powerful cultivation technique. It was a fusion of super speed. That was why it was called feng shuiing, because the cultivation technique passed down in his family was unparalleled speed. In just a moment, he appeared again. However, the place where he appeared had moved hundreds of meters away. A punch across the sky seemed to be able to kill until corpses were strewn all over the place. If it were any warrior below the rank of 100, they would not be able to withstand such a blow. They would be completely defeated in an instant. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng was not the slightest bit shocked. This was because everything was within his expectations. In the face of this attack, Lu Feng did not dodge. He wanted to refine his cultivation technique and let his cultivation technique advance. Therefore, he wanted to feel the true essence of all cultivation techniques. It was the same punch, but it was incomparably violent. It fused with Lu Feng's indomitable aura and explained his name, Peerless Edge. The collision of the two fists caused the area to be horribly damaged. The constructed virtual land instantly collapsed. Smoke and dust filled the air, obscuring everything. However, the battle was not over. In the smoke and dust, another fierce collision was heard. It was the violent collision between the two of them. Smoke and dust appeared again, and the entire space was dark. Seeing this scene, many of the spectators were slightly stunned. They did not expect that these two people, who were not ranked very high, could actually cause such a fierce collision. In the smoke and dust, the sound of collision was heard continuously. In the end, there was even a terrifying sound. That was a chi explosion. Between the two of them, there was actually a chi explosion in this virtual space. In that case, the power between them was far beyond the limit of one star. Finally, with the end of the most intense collision, two figures flew out. Lu Feng stood in his original position. His virtual clothes were in tatters. Similarly, feng shuiing didn't have it easy either. The two of them looked at each other and didn't continue to attack. At this moment, feng shuiing slowly opened his mouth with a trace of seriousness. I didn't expect that you would actually comprehend a cultivation method so quickly. Genius. You're definitely a genius. After watching the recent battle recordings, Wind Follows Shadow Moves was certain that Lu Feng had yet to comprehend a cultivation technique. However, in today's battle with him, Lu Feng had displayed techniques that were not inferior to his own. Moreover, the essence contained within those techniques was even faintly above his own. This could only mean that he had really comprehended a cultivation technique, and it was a cultivation technique that was even more powerful than his own. His amplification ability was in no way inferior to his family's battle techniques. Hearing this, Lu Feng smiled. He didn't comprehend a cultivation technique. Instead, he created a cultivation technique. His cultivation technique was condensed from all the battle experience in these 7 years. When he broke through, he even condensed the essence of over 40 battle techniques within. In the outside world, the amplification had already reached 4 times. A beginner cultivation technique with a 4-fold amplification could be ranked at the top of all beginner cultivation techniques. Even compared to the beginner cultivation techniques created by martial artists, it wasn't inferior in any way. The only thing that could firmly suppress him was the elementary part of those star-grade cultivation methods. Looking at Feng swaying in front of him, Lu Feng smiled lightly. However, at this moment, even this smile was filled with an incomparably violent will. Now it's already done. Then, let's end it. Hearing Lu Feng's words, Feng swaying was slightly stunned. Then, he revealed a strange expression. Just a few words of praise, and you really think that you're a peerless genius. He didn't say the last sentence, because at this moment, Feng swaying looked at the powerful fist that appeared in front of his chest. His figure began to slowly disappear. His eyes widened in disbelief. Until the last moment, he finally understood what had happened. However, he still didn't understand. He still didn't know how Lu Feng had done it. He had actually appeared in front of him so abruptly. It was clearly a situation where they were evenly matched. At this moment, it had actually turned into a completely unequal battle. Moreover, what he didn't understand the most was that he actually saw the silhouette of his own cultivation technique in the last hit. Latest news, 105 exceptional sharpness kills, 71 Feng swaying. The headlines changed again. This time, it was the news of Lu Feng killing Feng swaying. Below the news, there was a video of the battle just now. At this moment, the entire virtual battle space was slightly stirred. Although the gap between the ranks of 105 and 71 didn't seem that huge, this was a battle between the top 100. The change in the top 100 rankings was enough to attract the attention of ordinary people. As for those who directly jumped from 105 to 71, it was even rarer. Lu Feng slowly retreated from the battle space. He could naturally imagine the commotion caused by the battle just now. After all, he was also one of these sensational people in the past. However, at this moment, for Lu Feng, it was much more important to properly appreciate the results of the battle just now than to enjoy the cheers of victory. At the last moment, Lu Feng's punch completely destroyed Feng swaying. This might seem inconceivable to others. However, for Lu Feng, it really didn't mean much. Although Feng swaying was an advanced warrior, and he had also comprehended a beginner cultivation technique. However, all of this really didn't mean much in the virtual battle space. According to Lu Feng's estimation, the wind follows the shadow cultivation method would at most increase its power by 2 times in the modern world. The most it could fuse was around 20 types of essences, which was far from his 40 types of essences. In a situation where both of them were at the same level of strength, the result of a collision between the two was self-evident. In fact, at the beginning, Lu Feng could have easily destroyed him. However, for the sake of the perfection of his cultivation technique, he chose to meet force with force. During the collision, he felt the true essence of Feng swaying's cultivation technique. In the end, when he completely comprehended it, he didn't waste any more time. At this moment, Lu Feng had already retreated from the virtual space. He sat in the room without saying anything and just quietly closed his eyes. However, this state didn't last long because Lu Feng soon woke up. There was an inexplicable smile at the corner of his mouth, and there was a happy expression on his face. The true essence of his cultivation technique fused the essence of 20 types of techniques. Although I can't restore all of them, it shouldn't be a problem to restore a few types of technique essence from this true essence based on what I felt. This time, I'll properly comprehend it for a period of time and integrate these essences into my battle technique cultivation technique. I'll strive to increase the number of battle technique essences in my battle technique cultivation technique to 50 types as soon as possible. 50 types of battle technique essences meant that Lu Feng's cultivation technique had entered a whole new realm. It could increase his strength by 5 times in the beginner realm. I need to speed up my pace. Otherwise, when I become an intermediate warrior, the number of refined essences in my cultivation technique will still be less than 100 types. If I can't successfully condense the most perfect battle technique essence, then in the future, my exclusive battle technique cultivation techniques room for improvement will be limited. In fact, the reason why beginner battle technique cultivation techniques could increase a warrior's strength was because of the existence of these battle technique essences. Every type of essence had a certain amplification ability. When a warrior became a beginner, their strength didn't break through the standard of 10 stars. Therefore, every type of essence could give a 0, 1 times amplification, and 99 types of essence could increase the overall strength by more than 9 times. But once a warrior became an intermediate warrior, his strength would begin to step into the category of 10 stars and above. Compared to a beginner warrior, every stage of an intermediate warrior's strength would explosively increase by 10 times. Even if he didn't want to, his body would still be strengthened. Then, the amplification ratio of each type of essence would be greatly reduced. Just the battle technique essence alone wouldn't be able to give much of an amplification. At this time, what was needed was the battle technique essence. 100 types of battle technique essences could be combined into one to evolve into a perfect battle technique essence. And a battle technique essence could double the battle strength of an intermediate warrior. As for an advanced warrior, what was needed was the fusion of the battle technique essences, the true essence of the battle technique. Beginner cultivation techniques required battle technique essences. Every type of battle technique essence could increase the strength by 0.1 times. Intermediate cultivation techniques required battle technique essences. Every type of battle technique essence could increase the strength by 1 times. Advanced cultivation techniques required battle technique essence. Every type of battle technique essence could increase the strength by 1 times. This was the true reason why the battle technique cultivation techniques used by warriors could increase the warrior's strength. At that time, the amplification ratio of the 99 types of essence would be negligible. It wouldn't even be able to reach double. This kind of situation was undoubtedly something that Lu Feng didn't want to accept. Moreover, the battle technique essence wasn't something that only 100 types of battle technique essences could be smelted. The minimum requirement was that 20 types of battle technique essences could be smelted. But at the same time, 20 types of battle technique essences couldn't be compared to 100 types of battle technique essences. Maybe they could both increase the strength by 1 times, but once they collided, the difference would be obvious. Moreover, if 20 types of battle technique essences were used, then after entering the intermediate cultivation technique stage, this cultivation technique could only smelt 2 types of battle technique essences at most, or even 1 type of battle technique essence. This already limited the cultivation technique's limit in the future. And this kind of cultivation technique was absolutely unable to further smelt the true essence of the battle technique and become an advanced cultivation technique. Chapter 36. As Lu Feng's own exclusive cultivation technique, he didn't want to see his own cultivation technique only have the potential to become a mid-grade cultivation technique. This was also the reason why Lu Feng had to constantly comprehend. He wanted to make his own cultivation technique enter the mid-grade cultivation technique realm in the most perfect state possible. Therefore, he had to comprehend the essence of hundreds of different battle skills and fuse them into one to create the most perfect battle skill essence that belonged to him. Gradually, the traces of the wind following shadow cultivation technique during the previous confrontation kept appearing in his mind. Lu Feng had thoroughly felt those traces when he had used violent means to resist. In an instant, a feeling of nimbleness appeared, which was the most prominent aspect of the wind following shadow cultivation technique. What he pursued was a kind of speed, a kind of limit, and this was the true essence of his cultivation technique. The other battle skill essences revolved around this nimbleness and speed. What Lu Feng wanted to do was to restore this nimbleness to its original state. This was undoubtedly the most difficult part. As long as he could completely restore it, everything else would be trivial. Time passed slowly. Lu Feng hadn't moved an inch for the entire afternoon. He had been sitting quietly the whole time. However, at this moment, countless beads of sweat had already flowed down Lu Feng's cheeks. His expression was no longer as indifferent as before. Vaguely, it seemed like a sinister expression was spreading. Lu Feng had already entered the final moment. As long as he took one more step, he would be able to completely analyze the true essence of the wind following shadow cultivation technique. However, this final step was the most difficult one. In the past, his comprehension might have been terrifying enough to shock the entire starry sky, but it was far from reaching the level where he could casually analyze other people's cultivation techniques. After all, his age and experience were there. Perhaps he would be able to do this in the future, but right now, it was far from enough. However, things were different now. Condensing the primitive body and opening up the spiritual divine domain had allowed him to reach a terrifying level. Normally, he couldn't display the too terrifying primitive power condensed in his mind space. However, at this moment, they finally showed their invincibility. Slowly, Lu Feng's body began to tremble. It was also at this moment that some hazy brilliance seemed to appear in the unseen world. There wasn't much brilliance, but it was still there. When Lu Feng's expression was as sinister as it could be, the brilliance finally began to move. Finally, it all entered Lu Feng's body. Done. In an instant, his eyes opened. His pupils were filled with excitement. At this moment, Lu Feng had finally done it. This was the first time he had directly analyzed other people's cultivation techniques. This was a cultivation technique which was far beyond the essence of battle skills. However, he had done it. He had directly analyzed someone else's cultivation method completely. This was an inconceivable thing. The difficulty of this was dozens of times more difficult than comprehending the essence of a battle skill. Even though he felt sleepy and tired mentally. But Lu Feng didn't stop. The most difficult core essence had been completely restored by him. The rest was much easier. In the next moment, Lu Feng continued. After spending nearly 3 hours, he finally restored all the essence of the combat skills that he had sensed. 7. A total of 7 types of battle skills. As long as I completely integrate them into my cultivation technique, the number of refined essences in my cultivation technique will reach 47. In this case, I'll be close to the 5-fold increase of 50 types of essences. 50 battle skill essences meant that Lu Feng could unleash an even more terrifying battle prowess on top of the original limit of his own strength. In the mind space, I experienced endless loneliness, experienced countless changes of time, experienced countless life and death situations, and finally condensed the spiritual divine domain and the primitive body. I originally thought that the opening of the spiritual divine domain and the condensing of the primitive body was just the foundation to cultivate the primitive sutra and the great devil true body. But I didn't expect that they would have such a shocking effect. This time, if it weren't for their existence, I wouldn't have been able to reach this step. I wouldn't have been able to complete this incredible feat. Lu Feng knew that he was able to do such a shocking thing because of the opening of the spiritual divine domain and the condensing of the primitive body. If it weren't for them, he probably wouldn't have been able to do it now. In a while, it's time to integrate these essences into my cultivation technique. As long as I succeed, I'll enter the virtual battle space and continue to challenge until I can accumulate 100 types of essences. It was already nighttime. After spending an entire day, Lu Feng finally completed the feat that was impossible for a beginner warrior. After hastily finishing his meal, Lu Feng once again immersed himself in endless cultivation. This time, his goal was to integrate the 7 restored essences into his own cultivation method. The integration process was relatively smooth. Compared to restoring the essence of a cultivation technique, integration wasn't that difficult for Lu Fenglai. Back in the school hall, he had integrated 40 types of essence into one in one go. Compared to back then, it really wasn't much now. What a pity. If there was a cultivation technique for me to use as a reference, it would be much easier. At least I wouldn't have to spend so much effort to only restore 7 types of essences. If Lu Feng obtained the moving wind shadow cultivation technique, he could completely comprehend 20 types of essences from it. He wouldn't have to spend so much effort to sense and slowly restore 7 types of essences. However, Lu Feng was just casually saying this. He also knew how precious a cultivation technique was among the commoners. Even if it was just a beginner cultivation technique, it was still extremely rare. It was almost impossible for him to take out such a cultivation method for him to comprehend. When everything was completed, it was already past 10 p.m. Looking at the time, Lu Feng opened the Sky Channel and entered. There's actually information about me. Just as Lu Feng was browsing the Cymbidium news, he suddenly saw a piece of information. Although it wasn't an obvious place, Lu Feng still saw it. It was talking about the situation during the day when Lu Feng fought. Battles between the top 100 didn't happen often. Other than when the virtual battle space held events at specific times, it usually didn't appear. Today, it wasn't just a battle. It was even a warrior who wasn't in the top 100 defeating 71 warriors who had been famous for a long time. This was worth mentioning. Lu Feng glanced at the comments briefly and didn't continue to pay attention to it. It was nothing more than saying that Peerless Edge was a sock puppet account, and that a strong person used this sock puppet account to oppress others. Most people agreed with this point of view. After all, at the last moment, Lu Feng's arrogant words and unbeatable punch had already proved that he was far stronger than Feng Shuiying Di in the virtual battle space. Lu Feng continued to browse through other information and also took a look at the excavation of the ruins of the previous civilization in the Qingyuan star system. Then, he left the Sky Channel and went to rest. Early the next morning, Lu Feng climbed out of bed and went to the courtyard. After practicing the cultivation technique that he had condensed and evolved the day before, Lu Feng returned to his room once more. Today, he still had to do the same thing. Picking up the helmet and entering the virtual battle space, Lu Feng opened the battle ranking chart again. This time, just like before, he directly looked at the warriors in the top 100. This time, Lu Feng chose a warrior who was ranked 79th. Although he was ranked 79th, it didn't mean that his strength was weaker than Feng Shuiying Di. After all, the specialty of Feng Shuiying Di's cultivation technique was its extremely fast speed. This obviously had an extreme restraining effect on some violent warriors. Although their ranking wasn't as high as Feng Shuiying Di, it didn't mean that their combat strength wasn't good. This time, the warrior that Lu Feng chose was called Arrow. He was a warrior who specialized in violence. From the video, Lu Feng could feel that his cultivation technique was the epitome of extreme violence. Although it was the same twofold increase, the essence of the battle techniques contained in it were a few more than Feng Shuiying Di. This kind of warrior was more suitable for Lu Feng to comprehend. Perhaps because of yesterday's outburst and outstanding performance, Arrow quickly accepted Lu Feng's challenge request. This time, the virtual battle space directly sent a message to everyone who was online about the battle between the two of them. Unlike the previous time, the attention received this time was obviously much more. After all, he had just defeated a warrior ranked 71st yesterday. Today, he wanted to challenge a warrior ranked 79th. This caused quite a stir. The location of the battle was different from the previous day. Although it was still spacious, there were obviously more virtual obstacles. This was specially made by the higher-ups of the virtual battle space. After all, whether it was Lu Feng's performance or Arrow style yesterday, they were all leaning towards that kind of violent direction. And the existence of these obstacles was to highlight the terror of their violence. There wasn't much nonsense. Obviously, Arrow was, like his name, the kind of existence that advocated violence. There wasn't a word between the two of them. After the countdown ended, they directly entered the battle state. It had to be said, compared to Feng Shuiying Di, Arrow was obviously more powerful. If it wasn't for the extreme violence that gave up speed, then his ranking could at least advance to the top 60. In this battle, Lu Feng's blood was boiling. Although he had an overwhelming advantage in cultivation techniques, his opponent was after all a senior warrior. Even in the virtual battle space, which was almost a fair environment, it still reflected the strength of a senior warrior. Relying on his identity as a senior warrior plus that violent cultivation technique. When he fought with Lu Feng, he could almost display the battle strength of more than 30 types of essence cultivation techniques. Chapter 37. The two of them had given up on any form of movement techniques. They were simply exchanging blows with each other in the most violent manner. The essence of the air exhalation technique could almost be completely reflected in his fists. While fighting with air exhalation, Lu Feng could easily understand the true essence of his technique. In the end, after breaking through countless obstacles, Lu Feng unleashed his strongest attack. This attack was practically Lu Feng's strongest attack. Without a doubt, under Lu Feng's strongest attack, air exhalation did not have the slightest ability to resist and was completely blown apart. After completing all this, Lu Feng decisively went offline and once again entered a state of comprehension. 2 matches in 2 days, Exceptional Edge once again killed air exhalation at 79th place, displaying extremely strong combat talent. This time, it could even be mentioned in the Heavenly Network. Those who had previously speculated about Lu Feng's identity were even more certain of their own thoughts. This was because they realized that in today's battle, Lu Feng's explosive punch was a little stronger than yesterday's. No one would believe that in just one day, Lu Feng could achieve such a level of improvement. Perhaps there were people who could achieve such a level, but those people were definitely peerless geniuses who belonged to the entire Federation. On such a small planet, such a person would not appear at all. Therefore, everyone was certain that in the previous battle with Feng Shuiying, he had definitely hidden his strength. Therefore, whether it was in the virtual battle space or on the Sky Network, there was practically a sea of curses about Exceptional Edge. Lu Feng, who was silent in his cultivation, naturally did not know about these things. However, even if he knew, he would not be in the mood to pay attention to it. This was because at this moment, Lu Feng was once again at an extremely critical moment. This time, it was not because he could not separate those essences. Instead, in terms of fusion, Lu Feng had entered a clean bottle and a difficult obstacle. After a battle, Lu Feng directly separated 9 types of combat skill essences from air exhalation technique. However, when he fused the 3rd type, which was the 50th type of essence, he encountered a clean bottle. Lu Feng was also aware of this. Although there was only one difference between 49 types and 50 types, it was related to the difference of 1 level. 50 types of combat skills could increase a beginner warrior's strength by 5 times, while 49 types and 40 types could increase a beginner warrior's strength by 4 times. There was still a fundamental difference between the two. Although it was a neck flask, Lu Feng didn't care much about it. This was because he had fused 40 different battle skills and cultivation methods in one go. Of course, that also had an inseparable relationship with his will to fight. Even so, Lu Feng still managed to complete it. After spending nearly 5 hours, his exclusive cultivation technique finally advanced to a higher level, becoming a powerful beginner cultivation technique that could increase one's power by 5 times. This was a powerful breakthrough. Lu Feng felt a temporary invincibility enveloping him. He knew that he had broken another shackle and entered an even more powerful realm. Just like yesterday, there were no changes at night. After cultivating, Lu Feng entered the Sky Network. However, this time, Lu Feng obviously came with a purpose. He directly opened the information section about the virtual battle space. When he saw the information section, Lu Feng smiled. Sure enough, it was as he thought. Most of the information here was about him. However, when he saw the content, Lu Feng's smile turned into a strange one. These news articles were all about the same thing. Their statements were the same as everyone else's. It was certain that Lu Feng was a true powerhouse. He came to the virtual battle space only to satisfy his perverted desire, to find the joy of victory from defeating the weak. When he saw this information, Lu Feng didn't feel angry, but worried. He was worried that if he wanted to challenge someone in the future, would there still be people who would accept it? If that was really the case, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to find any opponents in the virtual battle space with a trace of worry. Lu Feng fell asleep early. The next day, as usual, Lu Feng logged into his virtual account in the virtual battle space. It was just that this time was different from the past, because after logging in, Lu Feng found that his mailbox was full of letters. In addition to the expected countless curses, there were also a lot of challenge messages. This confused Lu Feng. He casually opened a message, and this time, Lu Feng was even more surprised. The people who sent the messages weren't ordinary people. They were actually warriors who were ranked in the top 150. Most of the other challenge emails were sent by warriors who were ranked at the top of the list. They didn't blame Lu Feng. Instead, they showed that they were eager to fight. This was truly a little inconceivable. After thinking for a while, he still couldn't figure out why. However, it was good that there were people who wanted to challenge him. At least he didn't have to worry about not having an opponent. After selecting these challengers, Lu Feng finally chose a warrior who was ranked 66th. Although he wasn't the highest level among the challengers, this person was obviously more suitable for Lu Feng Lai, because he was also a warrior who was good at violent fighting. After clicking the button to accept the challenge, Lu Feng accepted the challenge message directly appeared in the information bar of the entire virtual battle space. It caused a sensation in an instant. Countless people crazily poured into the system-designated viewing platform. At the same time, Lu Feng was also teleported to a new environment. After 10 minutes of waiting, the challenger appeared. His ID was Mountain Breaker, which clashed with Lu Feng's ID, Peerless Edge. However, Lu Feng also knew that this challenger didn't use this ID just for him. After all, this warrior named Mountain Breaker was a well-known figure in the top 100 a few years ago. The preparation time wasn't over yet. Mountain Breaker quietly looked at Lu Feng. After a while, he actually bowed slightly to him. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng was stunned again. He didn't understand and just looked at Mountain Breaker in confusion. What do you mean by this? After bowing respectfully, Mountain Breaker straightened his posture. He looked at Lu Feng with a smile and said respectfully, "This time, thank you for choosing me. Thank you for your generosity." He frowned slightly. To be honest, Lu Feng wasn't satisfied with Mountain Breaker's answer. He felt a trace of doubt. "I want to know, since the people outside think that I'm strong and only came here to satisfy my perverted desire, then why do you still want to challenge me?" Broken Peak wasn't confused by Lu Feng's question. He seemed to have expected Lu Feng to ask such a question. Seeing that there was still a little time left, Broken Peak continued to explain, "I know your identity is incomparably noble and you are here for some entertainment. But to you, it's entertainment, but to us, it's a rare opportunity. If you directly displayed your overwhelming strength in the previous 2 battles and killed your opponents, then perhaps we wouldn't be so perverted as to seek your torture. But you didn't. We can feel that the 2 warriors you fought with, they gave it their all before they were completely defeated by you. Instead of saying that they were tortured by you, it's better to say that they were receiving your guidance. It's very rare to find someone who can give it their all and is willing to fight with you until the end. For such an opportunity to improve oneself, no one is willing to miss it. So, even if we know that you might be a strong person who comprehended a high-level cultivation technique, we still want to fight with you." He wanted to go all out in this battle to find out where he was lacking. And this is the reason. Hearing this, Lu Feng didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The reason why he allowed them to give it their all was to comprehend the true essence of their cultivation technique, so that he could comprehend more of the essence of their combat techniques and perfect his own cultivation technique. This kind of behavior should be considered as stealing their techniques. But at this moment, Mountain Breaker made it sound so great. This made Lu Feng really didn't know what to say. "Since that's the case, then let's fight. Unleash all your strength. Let's fight." The moment he finished speaking, the countdown had already ended. At this moment, Mountain Breaker let go of all his worries and directly raised his aura to the peak, allowing himself to instantly enter the peak of his life at this moment. Looking at this extremely solemn Mountain Breaker, Lu Feng also entered the battle state, but at this moment he was slightly sighing in his heart. If it was in the outside world, in a real environment, then even 10 of him wouldn't be a match for Mountain Breaker in front of him. But at this moment, in this virtual battle space, he was actually addressed as Sir by this advanced warrior whose true strength and realm far exceeded his own, and even wanted his guidance. Everything was so strange. Lu Feng didn't hesitate and directly punched out. This time, unlike the previous 2 battles, he only revealed the essence of more than 20 combat techniques. At this moment, his punch contained the essence of more than 30 combat techniques. Because he knew that Mountain Breaker in front of him couldn't be compared to the previous 2 people. In his cultivation technique, there were at least 30 combat techniques contained the essence of more than 30 combat techniques. Seeing Lu Feng's punch coming, Mountain Breaker instantly released his tense body and also met with a punch, without any reservation, directly using his most powerful strength. Just like that, two pairs of iron fists collided in the void. This time, it directly caused an explosion, shattering countless obstacles, directly creating a deep pit with a diameter of more than 10 meters on the ground. Chapter 38. Everything in the virtual battle space was set according to reality. Every warrior in the virtual space had the standard of a one-star warrior. To be able to produce such a terrifying destructive force here meant that in the real space, they could erupt with such a terrifying combat power with just a one-star warrior's strength. Horrifying, incomparable horrifying. Everyone who was watching felt a tremor that came from the depths of their hearts. Although they all knew that the cultivation technique had a terrifying destructive power in addition to its amplification, when they really saw it, they realized that the destructive power was actually so terrifying. In the modern world, perhaps a one-star warrior would be able to achieve this level of destruction with an all-out attack. However, that would require them to pour everything they had into attacking the ground with all their might. At this moment, the huge crater on the ground was only the result of the aftermath of the collision between the two. One was full power, the other was the aftermath. The difference between the two was obvious. This was the terror of the cultivation technique's amplification. Battle, continuous battle. The two of them were already in a real fight. Although Lu Feng had already suppressed the extent of his cultivation technique, only erupting with an amplification of the same level, his opponent was a true high-rank warrior. The gap between the two was originally huge, but the current Lu Feng was not at a disadvantage at all. Faintly, he even began to suppress his opponent's strength. Finally, when the huge collision occurred, the two separated and stood on opposite sides of the ground, looking at each other. Looking at Lu Feng's figure that quickly calmed down from his berserk state, a trace of admiration flashed in Peak Breaker's eyes. "You're very strong, really strong. You're only using the same amplification as me, but you're constantly suppressing me. Although the level of my family's cultivation techniques comprehension is not deep, it's still in the primary realm. In the primary realm, I can't even erupt with 4 times the combat power at the peak. But you're using the same amplification to suppress me perfectly, making me unable to resist at all. I'm a high-rank warrior in the real world. Then your real realm should be a warrior. Martial artist, what kind of honorable title was that? The existence of a warrior was a terrifying powerhouse who could comprehend martial intent. Their strength could no longer be described with words. Out of thousands of high-ranking warriors, only one martial artist could be born. There is no need to talk about the reverence of martial artists. But at this moment, Peak Breaker said that Lu Feng was a martial artist. This caused the countless spectators to exclaim in surprise. Lu Feng didn't say anything when he heard Break Peak's comment. Warriors? In the future, he would definitely become a martial artist, and being a martial artist was definitely not his end goal. His goal was to break through to the God realm, to reach the peak of the divine martial realm. It was just that being a martial artist was simply a step to surpass. However, that was in the future. At the very least, it would take a long time for Lu Feng to reach that level. The current him was still far from the level of a martial artist. Therefore, Lu Feng's ability to oppress a senior warrior in almost the same realm was not due to any secret method or secret enhancement. Instead, it was him who was truly terrifying. His combat talent was unparalleled. Even before condensing the primordial body and opening the God's domain, he was already extremely powerful. At that time, he wasn't even a beginner warrior. He hadn't received any inheritance or assistance, but he had already begun to condense his own exclusive martial arts. Such a combat talent. Even in the entire Federation's trillions of people belonged to the ranks of the true geniuses. Now, after opening the God's domain, Lu Feng's comprehension and combat talent had reached an unimaginable level. He was confident that in terms of comprehension and fighting talent alone, he would not be inferior to any of the direct descendants of the divine descendant family. With the cultivation of the primordial scripture, his various aspects would inevitably improve and become even more terrifying, until the infinite starry sky trembled. Now, perhaps he was still inferior to martial artists of the same realm, to those geniuses in the high-ranking warrior realm, and to those peerless geniuses in the middle-ranking warrior realm. But to ordinary existences, he already had an overwhelming advantage. This was the reason why Lu Feng could completely suppress a senior warrior in almost the same situation. Lu Feng did not say anything, but Peak Breaker seemed to believe that Lu Feng had tacitly agreed. At this moment, he was even more respectful. After a slight bow, he slowly straightened his body. The last attack is the most powerful attack that I am proud of. Although my talent is not strong, due to some special reasons, I have comprehended the true technique of a warrior, the supreme technique. In order to show my respect, I will use a power that exceeds my limit. Please, let me fail with peace of mind. Lu Feng was slightly dazed, and then gently nodded. His expression had already turned solemn. Normally, after using a technique, the warrior's strength would be increased by the technique's upper limit. However, some techniques were not like that. Their techniques did not have the slightest enhancement effect. It was said to be a complete set of techniques, but in fact, it was just one move. But it was this move that caused people to tremble in fear, because this move was the fusion of the warrior's soul and life's strongest killing power. It was the fusion of all their essences, the strongest attack. And this attack instantly erupted with a terrifying battle strength that could often exceed one's own limit, surpassing the limit of the technique's enhancement by a lot. This kind of technique was called the supreme technique. It meant to be supreme, but also had the true essence of being unable to surpass it. Of course, wanting to erupt with the battle strength of the supreme technique was also extremely difficult. It was already very difficult for ordinary people to obtain and comprehend the technique. As for the supreme technique, even if it was only the initial level of the supreme technique, it was still an absolute taboo. It was a treasure that even a small family would do their best to protect. And wanting to comprehend the supreme technique, almost only 1 out of 10,000 people would be able to do so. Moreover, once the supreme technique was used, the consequences would be unbearable. To be able to comprehend the supreme technique, which one of them was not an outstanding person, the only one among thousands of warriors, but to be able to use the supreme technique and still be safe and sound, there was almost no one, because the definition of the supreme technique was to erupt with the strongest power of the physical body and soul, until they reached their limit, until they could no longer increase their strength. Looking at this faintly formed, it would definitely be earth-shattering. If it was placed in the real world, it would definitely be able to make the earth tremble. Lu Feng was speechless. He only silently looked at it. Faintly, his hands seemed to be trembling slightly. Even though Lu Feng had already gotten everything he needed so far, Lu Feng didn't want to waste any more time. However, he still wanted to see just how terrifying this most powerful attack was, because he also had his own trump card. He had hidden it for 7 years, the strongest attack that he had never used before. In the next moment, a violent power began to be born, rapidly forming and finally wrapping around his entire body. At this moment, the Peak Breaker seemed to have turned into a berserk giant, causing people to tremble and submit. What a terrifying power! This attack has already displayed its absolute strength. Did you see the system's display? Countless spectators exclaimed. They looked at the numbers displayed by the system, each of them in disbelief. On the system's display at the side, it clearly showed that the power level of the Peak Breaker was soaring. In an instant, the 3 stars were no longer a barrier. In the next moment, the 4 stars barrier was shattered. In another instant, the 5 stars became a thing of the past. At the final moment, it shattered, completely shattered. 6 stars. 6 times amplification. The strongest attack of the Peak Breaker actually reached a 6 times amplification. Could it be that he used some terrifying secret technique to burn his own body? Too terrifying. Too terrifying. If this was in the real world, with the strength of an advanced warrior, wouldn't it mean that his final attack could reach the level of a warrior? Countless spectators were shocked, completely falling into a frenzy. They found it hard to imagine that with only 1 star of strength, he could actually erupt with 6 times the combat strength. This had truly exceeded the limits of their imagination. Looking at the state of the peak breaker, Lu Feng was also filled with pride. He could feel that if this attack was in the real world, it would definitely be a terrifying killing blow. Of course, the outcome would also be incomparably miserable. The peak breaker might be able to erupt with the physical strength of a warrior, but after this attack, he would most likely suffer unimaginable injuries. This was the terror of a supreme technique. However, in the next moment, as these people continued to exclaim in shock, their mouths completely closed, because they had seen an inconceivable scene. They had seen a scene that had left them completely dumbfounded. On the system's display, in the column belonging to Lu Feng, there was a clear number, 10. This was actually a 10 times amplification. At this moment, Lu Feng was in a mysterious state. He could clearly feel that all of his willpower and strength were flowing away, converging toward his fists. At this moment, he felt a kind of power that he had never felt before, although the power that he could erupt at this moment was far from his peak. But now, Lu Feng had a kind of illusion that surpassed everything. In a trance, he seemed to feel that his soul and physical body had reached the limit of sublimation, as if they were about to erupt with the most terrifying glory of his life. Ever since condensing this fist, Lu Feng had never used it. Even when he was humiliated by Zhao Chong, he still didn't use it, because this attack at that time was far from what the current one could compare to. It had not transformed to the current terrifying extent. Chapter 39. At this moment, when he returned after completing his shocking transformation, his strongest attack had also undergone a transformation. It was also filled with invincible will. You actually comprehended a supreme technique. Mountain Breaker was shocked. He thought that by relying on his supreme technique, he might be able to catch Lu Feng off guard and put him in a disadvantageous position. And this was his glory. After all, in his eyes, Peerless Edge was a true martial artist. However, he hadn't expected that Lu Feng would also be able to comprehend a supreme law. In fact, Lu Feng's supreme law was even stronger than his own. It actually broke through the limit of 10 times and reached such an unbelievable level. This was really heaven-defying, completely heaven-defying, and shocking the world. The violent power had already shattered everything, causing people to tremble. It was indescribable. This was the final moment, the final crucial moment to determine the winner. Although everyone already knew the result, at this moment, they could still see the appearance of a miracle. After all, in their eyes, Mountain Breaker was a weakling. For him to challenge the level of a martial artist was already an unbelievable thing. A violent roar echoed. In this 99% virtual space, even the production of sound was imitated to the extreme. Countless audiences' ears were ringing, and they couldn't hear any sound at all. Endless dust flew, and all the audience quickly chose the option to increase the transparency. Soon, before the smoke and dust dissipated, they finally saw the final scene. Countless people sighed deeply. They understood that miracles wouldn't appear so easily. In front of such a huge gap, miracles were even harder to appear. Mountain Breaker lost. In the image, he was incomparably miserable. Although his real body wouldn't suffer any injuries, in the virtual space, he was still so miserable and miserable. Countless bright red appeared, almost soaking his whole body. His arm had been shattered during the collision and completely disappeared. At this moment, there was almost no sign of life in him. In the final moment, he quietly looked at Lu Feng, filled with a feeling of admiration. This was because he had completely understood the gap between him and Lu Feng. The supreme technique I comprehended is called Great Massacre. It's a part of the supreme technique passed down in my family. It's a part of the elementary techniques. Originally, my supreme technique was the same as my cultivation technique. They were both at the comet level. Unfortunately, my talent was only at this level. Although he had accidentally comprehended the Great Massacre, the level of comprehension was still too low. At most, I can only unleash 6 times my combat strength. If I can take a step further and comprehend a higher level, then I believe that even though I will still fail, I will still be able to heavily injure you. Can you tell me what your supreme technique is called? Lu Feng was silent. Broken Peak was right. If Kieran could further comprehend the supreme technique, Great Slaughter, then the strike just now could be amplified to 7 or 8 times more violent. At that time, even if he could win, he would still have to pay an unimaginable price. After all, his supreme technique was on the level of a comet. It was a powerful star-grade cultivation technique that surpassed high-grade cultivation techniques. After a long time, Lu Feng slowly sighed and finally spoke. My supreme technique doesn't have a name. It's the same as my cultivation technique. It originated from the same source, regardless of whether it was the supreme technique or Lu Feng's cultivation technique. They were all created by Lu Feng. Although they were elementary, Lu Feng firmly believed that as long as he was strong enough, he would be able to perfect all the cultivation techniques and turn them into intermediate, advanced, and even comet-level cultivation techniques. The name of my cultivation method is unique. The whole world was in an uproar. Everyone in the Cymbidium who had watched the battle was boiling with excitement. They had already known the existence and definition of the supreme technique through various channels. Everyone found it hard to believe that a supreme technique had appeared in such a battle. It was also because of the existence of the supreme technique that countless people began to pay attention to Lu Feng. However, it was a pity that Lu Feng disappeared after the battle. Many people wanted to contact him, but were unable to do so. The entire Cymbidium was in a complete uproar. Even the Heavenly Network was scrambling to report it. This time, it wasn't just the Cymbidium that was affected. Even the surrounding life-bearing planets were the same. After all, 2 supreme techniques had appeared in a battle, and one of them had even reached a terrifying 10-fold increase. This was really shocking and unimaginable. On the second day after the battle, countless people poured into the virtual battle space. For 3 consecutive days, Unique Edge would challenge opponents every morning. On the 4th day, everyone was looking forward to it. After all, even the supreme technique, which could be said to be a forbidden technique in the legends, had appeared. What was there to be dissatisfied about? However, what disappointed them was that Lu Feng didn't appear for the entire second day. There wasn't even any news about him. It was as if he had completely disappeared. This disappointed countless people. The only thing they could do was to continuously replay the video of the battle between Lu Feng and Peak Breaker. Of course, there were also many people who didn't enter the virtual battle space at all on the second day. It wasn't that they didn't care, but they knew that Lu Feng would definitely not appear on the second day. These people were all people who truly knew about the existence of the Supreme Law. They also understood that although it was happening in the virtual battle space, the backlash from using the Supreme Law still existed. It was just that it was slightly worse than the situation in the real world where one was on the brink of death. However, an existence was an existence. It was impossible for it to recover so quickly. These people reckoned that if Lu Feng wanted to recover, it would be impossible for him to do so without a month's time. Therefore, they wisely didn't waste time. It was a pity that these people didn't see Lu Feng's current state. If they did, they would definitely be extremely shocked. This was because after only one day, Lu Feng didn't seem to have any sequelae. At this moment, he was quietly comprehending the essence of the battle technique and continuing to integrate and evolve his own exclusive technique, Unique Edge. After a long time, his eyes finally opened slowly. At this moment, Lu Feng seemed to be in high spirits. He didn't look like someone who had used the supreme technique at all. Feeling that his technique had further transformed, He had already entered the door of a six-fold amplification and was even close to the threshold of a seven-fold amplification. Lu Feng was very satisfied, very satisfied. It's worthy of being a comet-level technique. It's a star-level technique that surpasses high-level techniques. It's only the initial stage of the cultivation amplification, but it contains so much essence. I believe that if the initial stage of this technique passed down in the peak breaker family can be cultivated to the extreme, then it can at least increase by 4 times. Unfortunately, this was the extent of his talent. I think that being able to comprehend 3 times is already the limit. It's almost impossible to go any higher. The higher the level of the technique, the stronger the amplification effect at each level. For example, as long as one could comprehend all the initial stages of the cultivation methods of those pinnacle star-level cultivation methods and supreme cultivation methods that surpass the star-level cultivation methods to the extreme, then one would probably be able to unleash an increase of 8 or even 9 times. Of course, this was under the condition that one could comprehend it. After all, the higher the level of the technique, the harder it was to comprehend. As for the initial stage of the peak star-level technique, it was impossible to completely comprehend it without exceptional talent. Sitting on the bed, after finally completing everything, Lu Feng slowly stood up. Lu Feng also felt that it was inconceivable that his body could recover so quickly. After all, Lu Feng already understood the existence of the supreme technique very well. Although it was only used in the virtual battle space, it wouldn't hurt the physical body at all in the spiritual space. It would only cause an overdraft of the mind and soul. However, the overdraft of the soul was even more difficult to recover. There were people who used it in the battle space before. However, the ending wasn't very good. Even the most relaxed person could only get out of bed after half a year. The most miserable one even directly fell in a brain death. But for him, when he just left the virtual space, Lu Feng indeed felt an unprecedented fatigue. However, he understood that with the existence of the God's land and the primordial body, he wouldn't be so miserable. It was very possible to rest in bed for 10 days to half a month. If it wasn't to verify the strongest power of the supreme technique in unique, Lu Feng wouldn't be so stupid to use it. However, what he didn't expect was that, just after waking up, Lu Feng found that he had completely recovered. Other than feeling a little tired, he didn't feel any discomfort. This was undoubtedly incredible. However, for such a situation, Lu Feng was endlessly happy. This was because he knew that using the supreme technique in the battle space would only take half a day to recover. Then, in the present world, he was afraid that he wouldn't be as miserable as others. To any warrior, such a situation was absolutely a huge advantage. After all, this meant that Lu Feng could increase his own buffs and enhance his supreme technique's power. After a moment of joy, Lu Feng continued to perfect the technique. This time, it took another day to finally decompose and restore the essence of several combat skills in the true essence of Duanfeng's technique. There was no doubt that it was another fusion. With a few experiences, Lu Feng was able to fuse them much faster. Even if he broke through the limit of 6-fold amplification, he didn't waste much time. When everything was completed, it was already the night of the second day after the battle. He opened the separation skylight and stood under the endless starry sky. Lu Feng was peaceful and quiet. He looked up at the endless starry sky and was filled with an unprecedented sense of carefreeness. Chapter 40. The Essence of 73 Types of Combat Skills. My cultivation technique has been perfected to such an extent. Even the elementary part of most star-level cultivation techniques can't have a 7-fold increase. But I've unknowingly completed a magnificent feat. In his eyes, there was an unprecedented joy. Lu Feng knew that he had completed a magnificent feat generally. It was very difficult to improve a cultivation technique after it was completed. To be able to increase a cultivation method from 4 times to 7 times in just a few days like Lu Feng did, it would take a lot of effort. This was almost impossible. Even if it was only an elementary cultivation technique that was improved, it would still be the same. However, Lu Feng had completed it. At this moment, he understood even more how terrifying the mysterious Futu in his mind space was. After opening the first level, the primordial scripture and the devil true body appeared, two incomparably heaven-defying supreme cultivation techniques. Among them, I even completed the condensation of the primordial scripture and the opening of the divine realm. And relying on these, I completed this astonishing feat. I just don't know what else I can get when I enter the second level. It seems that I need to find out more. On the second day, the fanatical atmosphere in the virtual battle space had not subsided at all. Lu Feng also gave up the idea of continuing to challenge. Now, his cultivation technique had integrated the essence of 73 types of combat skills. As long as he gathered 27 types, he could reach 100 types. At that time, as long as he could fuse these 100 types of combat skills into one, he could evolve the perfect martial arts essence. And his exclusive cultivation technique, the Soul Dominator, would also evolve into an intermediate cultivation technique. However, Lu Feng also understood that before he became an intermediate warrior, it was still too difficult to fuse the 100 types of combat skills into martial arts essence. In this way, he didn't know how much time it would take. In addition, it was not suitable for him to enter the virtual battle space now. The supreme cultivation technique that he had used previously had a terrifying tenfold increase. If an ordinary person used such a shocking combat power, even in the virtual battle space, it would be difficult to recover without a few months. If he were to go out now, the shock he would cause would be countless times more terrifying than if he were to use a supreme technique. At that time, those hidden, peerless experts would probably come out to find him and obtain this supreme secret technique that could allow him to quickly recover after using a supreme technique. Therefore, even though Lu Feng was eager to perfect the beginner level of zoned only, in the end he still held it in. To tell you the truth, what exactly is heavenly reaching Futu? Why would it appear in my mind space? Lu Feng was endlessly puzzled by Skirich Futu. Everything was too inconceivable, but in his perception, everything was so natural that he didn't feel the slightest bit abrupt. He didn't have time to think about this before, but now he had the time. After thinking for a while, Lu Feng finally took out the Sky Network communication device and entered the Sky Network. Now, the entire Sky Network was still in a state of excitement. Countless news and headlines were all revolving around Lu Feng's battle. As for these, Lu Feng only read a few of them with interest and didn't pay attention to them anymore. He had more important things to do now. Following his own thoughts, he began to search for all the information about the pagoda on the Sky Network. The Sky Network was indeed the crystallization of the Alliance's highest technology. Basically, apart from those taboo things, as long as one wanted to find it, one could find it here. And this was the information that Lu Feng needed. Just by saying the words pagoda and Futu, countless information appeared in an instant. Among them, there were many introductions. However, Lu Feng didn't feel anything about these. After browsing through countless pictures and information, he still couldn't find anything very late. In the end, Lu Feng could only give up helplessly. Just looking at it won't do anything. It just so happens that there's still half a month before school starts. My physical body has already reached the peak of 9 stars, and I can't make a breakthrough in my cultivation technique. I'll use this time to look at the real thing. I'll treat it as a vacation while I'm at it. Anyway, there was still half a month's time. Lu Feng could also take advantage of this opportunity to relax. Since he had decided, there was no need to think about anything else. However, Lu Feng also hesitated for a long time about his destination. In the end, Lu Feng still chose that planet with life. After making the decision, Lu Feng immediately bought an interstellar flight ticket to that planet. What he had to do now was wait for the arrival of the next day. Time passed very quickly. The next day, Lu Feng got out of bed early. After tidying up everything, he completely locked down the villa. Lu Feng set a time limit of half a month. He would be back in half a month's time. At that time, there would still be a few days before school started. After this period of time, the matter of the virtual battle space should have died down. If he appeared at that time, there shouldn't be much of a problem. At that time, he would use the last few days to fight a few battles and strive to complete the cultivation technique before school started. He would reach 100 types of combat skill essence. After he became an intermediate warrior, Unique could also smoothly evolve into an intermediate cultivation technique. After leaving the villa, Lu Feng drove the flying car all the way to the Interstellar Flight Center. Lu Feng was quite familiar with this place. Before this, every year when his parents came back, they would take him on a trip to various planets. Therefore, Lu Feng had been here more than 10 times. After finding the parking lot and parking his flying car, Lu Feng walked directly to the hall. After waiting for nearly 2 hours and showing various documents, Lu Feng finally boarded the spaceship. He knew that this would be a long trip. Although the space jump technology had been invented, many routes could not be used because of the restrictions of many space cracks. Therefore, if he wanted to reach his destination, it would take at least a few days. However, this was already very good. If he only relied on flying, then even if he entered the sublight speed, it was absolutely impossible to reach it without more than 10 years. Lu Feng leaned on the gaseous sofa and closed his eyes slightly. It was absolutely peaceful here. Except for the slight turbulence before entering the space jump, it was extremely calm, just like the ground. And Lu Feng was already very familiar with all this. This time, his destination was Gufang Star. This was an ancient planet discovered by humans 2,000 years ago. There used to be a civilization here, but with the changes of time, that civilization had disappeared. However, they still left a lot of ruins. And the pagoda that Lu Feng wanted to come into contact with was one of the biggest relics of this civilization. Of course, this was not a destination that Lu Feng randomly chose, because when he browsed through the pictures of the pagoda, he saw Gufang Star at a glance. For some reason, Lu Feng always felt that the pagoda of Gufang Star was a little special and a little familiar. As for what was special and familiar about it, he really didn't know. However, it was because of this slight feeling that Lu Feng had made up his mind to head to Gufang Star. The civilization of Gufang Star worshipped pagoda-like buildings crazily. Whether it was the place where they lived or the temple where they sacrificed, all of them were in the shape of a pagoda. According to human research, humans once came to the conclusion that the Gufang Star civilization had once multiplied to the limit, giving birth to countless powerhouses. Among them, there were even legendary divine beings. During that time, their footprints could be found all over the thousands of planets around the Gufang star system. They even left their footprints in many other star systems. This was a terrifying civilization. Perhaps it was not comparable to the current human alliance, but among the billions of races and civilizations in the entire universe, it was definitely among the top. During their peak era, they spread the aura of countless civilizations and established an existence similar to a dynasty. However, later, they seemed to have a war with the peak civilization of another galaxy for some reason. In the end, the entire race disappeared, leaving only those magnificent buildings and immortal civilizations. From Gufang Star, humans found many brilliant relics of civilization. None of these were related to science and technology. Most of them were combat skills and cultivation methods. Even among these cultivation methods, they found supreme cultivation methods that surpassed the star level. And the discovery at that time shocked the entire Federation. One must know that the supreme cultivation methods that surpassed the star level were heaven-defying, shocking the entire Federation and making the entire galaxy tremble. And a supreme cultivation method that surpassed the star level could almost create a peak first-class family. The appearance of the supreme cultivation method once caused countless hidden powerhouses in the Federation to appear and fight for it. However, in the end, this cultivation method disappeared. Many people guessed that this cultivation method was finally obtained by the Federation government. However, these were all people's guesses. No one could give an accurate answer. In addition to the supreme cultivation method, several peak star level cultivation methods were found. These cultivation methods were eventually divided up by countless forces and collected by each of them. In addition to the cultivation methods, many secret alchemy and refining methods were found in Gufang's star. The refining methods of these things have been lost. However, after hundreds of years of research, humans finally used special methods to restore the essence of these methods and developed many warrior and psychic medicine. As for the secret alchemy methods, those were collected by the Federation and created countless new technologies. In the end, they strengthened the technological combat power of humans. Of course, the emergence of these alchemy and alchemy methods made the psychic masters the most proud. For this, they even faintly created a small era. Chapter 41. It could be said that the existence of Gufang's star had saved humanity at least 100 years of development time. Hence, in a galaxy where humans roamed freely, Gufang's star had become one of the more famous planets with life. Compared to the Cymbidium, Gufang's star was not only many times larger, but its population was also far greater than the Cymbidium. Gufang's star's volume was close to 100,000 times that of the Cymbidium. It was one of the largest planets, and its volume was comparable to some small stars. Such a huge planet was enough to attract the surrounding planets to orbit around it, forming a small galaxy. However, there were no satellites around Gufang's star, and even the smallest meteorites were not attracted to it. This phenomenon had been studied by countless scientists of the Federation for a long time, but they were unable to come to a conclusion. Later, with the arrival of an ancient god, the scientists finally stopped their research. However, the Federation had never announced the specific reason. Since then, the Federation had developed Gufang's star vigorously, and even sent a god-level invincible being to be stationed here. Finally, after a few thousand years of development, Gufang's star had finally reached its current scale. Legend has it that Gufang's star was discovered by a human godly king from a distant era. It was also named by the supreme being of the universe. It has to be said, Gufang's star is indeed legendary. Gufang's star has a population of 10 trillion, which is 10,000 times that of the Cymbidium. This number is indeed terrifying. 10 trillion people. This number was enough to shock countless people. This was 10,000 times that of the Cymbidium. The huge population naturally brought about the emergence of all kinds of geniuses. In the past few thousand years, many of the powerful geniuses that emerged in the Federation came from Gufang's star. However, it was a pity that there were no superpowers on this super planet, which was enough to be ranked in the top 30 of the Federation. Even the powerful families and huge financial groups had no intention of getting involved. It was also because of this that although Gufang's star revered martial arts, it was not as bloody and violent as other famous planets. Because here, the Federation was the most powerful existence, and the law was the supreme scripture. After 2 days of space jumping and 3 days of nonstop flying, Lu Feng finally set foot on Gufang's star after 5 days. In the past, when he came out with his parents, the places he went to were only a few planets in the surrounding galaxies. The furthest place they went was just a few hours of long jump in space and half a day of sailing. This was the first time Lu Feng had traveled for more than 5 days. The moment he stepped out of the ship's door and onto the ground, Lu Feng felt a rare sense of tranquility. Although there was almost no feeling of turbulence during the journey. However, they were in the endless void after all. If they were not careful, they could be destroyed at any time. Lu Feng didn't like this feeling of not having any initiative. It could even be said that he hated it. Therefore, the moment he set foot on Gufang's star, Lu Feng felt a kind of spiritual peace. Lu Feng stretched a little, but in the next moment, he let out a soft cry of surprise, because he felt a strange feeling. That's not right. Lu Feng frowned slightly. He felt the strangeness around him, and he muttered to himself. Here, why is it like this? After training in the gravity accelerator for a long time, Lu Feng's sense of gravity had reached an extremely sensitive level. Therefore, as soon as he arrived here, he felt the strangeness around him. The gravity here seems a bit wrong. Why is the gravity on such a large planet similar to Cymbidium? Could it be that the Federation has already created a new gravity balancing device? Generally, after a life planet with development value was discovered by humans, it would be completely transformed before immigration. The first step of transformation was to balance the gravity. After all, most people in the Federation were still ordinary people. Even the number of beginner soldiers was only 1% of that of ordinary people. On many huge planets, the gravity was extremely terrifying. It often exceeded the standard gravity by hundreds or even thousands of times. In order to survive in these places, the first thing to do was to change the gravity. Therefore, one of the most advanced human technology, the gravity balancing device, was born. After discovering a habitable planet, the gravity balancing device will be directly placed in the center of the planet's core using a special method. Through the gravity balancing device, it would slowly transform the gravity of the entire planet. This kind of technology was already the Federation's top technology. Although it was terrifying, there was a limit to the number of planets that could be used. Today, among more than 30 superplanets with a human population of more than 10 trillion, only the capital administrative planet and a few well-known special planets could be suitable for human habitation due to their own special characteristics. As for the other planets, they were too large. Even the gravity balancing device couldn't transform them. It could only slightly change the environment. But here, Lu Feng didn't find the existence of an energy shield, but the existence of the entire Gufang planet was comparable to 1/3 the size of the capital administrative planet. The gravity of such a place was almost the same as the standard gravity of the Federation. Could it be that Gufang planet is also a special planet? Before coming here, Lu Feng was only interested in the pagodas on Gufang planet. He didn't have a deep understanding of other things. So he didn't know the reason for all this. Just as Lu Feng was slightly puzzled, a figure sounded in his ear. This Gufang planet is indeed a relatively special planet. Not only is the gravity here suitable for human habitation without modification, but the entire planet also has almost no gravity. This is why such a giant planet comparable to a star doesn't have a single satellite around it. Hearing this, Lu Feng suddenly recalled the strange feeling he had when he was on the spaceship. At that time, overlooking the entire Gufang planet from outer space, although it was gorgeous and magnificent, Lu Feng also felt a sense of confusion. And now, after hearing this voice's reminder, he finally understood. It turned out that the reason for his confusion was because he didn't see the existence of any satellites. Such a huge planet, but there were no satellites around it. This was really a little unbelievable. Then what's the reason? I think the size and mass of Gufang planet is definitely one of the largest planets with life in the Federation. Lu Feng turned around, looked in the direction of the voice, and asked his question. The moment he saw that person, his eyes flickered. Just a moment later, this throbbing was deeply hidden by Lu Feng. The person who spoke was a young existence, and Lu Feng also expected this. After all, the voice just now had already expressed it. When Lu Feng saw him, there was still a trace of shock because the young man in front of him was really too outstanding. Outstanding, he was outstanding. Although they had never met before, and although they didn't even know each other, the moment he saw him, a word involuntarily appeared in Lu Feng's mind. That word was outstanding. Just looking at the appearance alone, it could almost be said to be impeccable. Lu Feng thought that he was already a handsome man with a graceful demeanor. However, he still felt that he was lacking in comparison. It wasn't a matter of appearance, but a kind of temperament. Of course, he was still a little lacking in terms of appearance. After all, the young man in front of him looked like he was in his 20s. Lu Feng was only 17 years old now. Although he was more mature, he still looked young and inexperienced at first glance. Perhaps after a few years of real maturity, he would be able to possess the demeanor of a young man. However, right now, there was no comparison. However, The temperament of the young man was something that Lu Feng admitted that he couldn't compare with. Although he was just standing there, accompanied by an old man, his appearance gave Lu Feng an incomparably noble feeling, as if he was a natural king. At the moment, he was just exiled to the mortal world, but he still couldn't hide the dazzling brilliance that required the worship of countless people. Lu Feng was stunned. The man also noticed this. However, when he saw that Lu Feng had recovered almost instantly, a strange look flashed across the man's eyes, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. This is a mystery. Legend has it that the martial god of the Federation has solved it. However, the real reason has never been announced. If you want to know the reason, then go ask the higher-ups of the Federation personally. They'll know. Hearing this, Lu Feng nodded slightly. He didn't think that the man was trying to deceive him. After all, there was no point in doing so. Thank you very much. After saying this, Lu Feng turned around and was about to leave. He didn't know why, but he didn't like standing in front of this man. It wasn't because of his powerful, noble aura, but because he didn't want to. He couldn't explain the reason, but he just didn't want to face him. Although Lu Feng could feel that the man didn't have any malice towards him, this feeling made Lu Feng really uncomfortable, so he turned around and was about to leave. Seeing Lu Feng leave just like that, the man was stunned for the first time. No one had ever completely ignored him like Lu Feng. At this moment, the smile on the corners of his mouth widened again. What an interesting person. Hearing the man's words, the old man who seemed to be his follower revealed a strange expression. He looked at the man and finally opened his mouth to ask, "Young master, I rarely hear you say the word interesting. In the past, even if it was them, your evaluation was only average. What's so special about this peak beginner youth that even you're interested in him? Although he has the dual identity of a beginner psychic and a warrior, in addition to his age, he could be considered a little genius. However, there are quite a few such geniuses in the family. Why are you interested in him?" You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.